Hello everyone, I am Alex and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I broke into that old house on a Tuesday night. I had a camera bag slung over my shoulder and a flashlight in my hand. The boards on the windows were loose enough for me to pry one aside and slip through. Furthermore, I thought an abandoned place would give me exactly what I needed. I was looking for striking photos to boost my portfolio. I wanted shots that would make people stop and stare. Furthermore, I didn't expect anything else. Furthermore, I expected creaking floors and dusty furniture. Furthermore, I never believed in ghosts or supernatural nonsense. But what I found there still makes my stomach tighten every time I think about it. The front room smelled like mold and damp wood. Furthermore, I just liked dark rundown settings because they made good material for my pictures. My flashlight beam cut through the dust particles floating around me. The air felt heavy and it was colder than it had been outside. I heard my own breath. My pulse thudded in my ears. I tried to ignore the chill on my neck as I stepped farther inside. The door was stuck, so I couldn't open it from the inside, which meant I had to remember the way back to the window. I glanced back to make sure I could still see the opening. I told myself I'd keep track of every turn so I wouldn't get lost in there. Furthermore, I walked into what looked like an entry hall. There were old picture frames lying on the floor. The walls were cracked. The wallpaper had peeled off in big sheets. I could see nails sticking out where pictures might have once hung. I looked around with my flashlight and noticed the staircase to the second floor. The steps looked weak, but I planned to go up there later if it was safe. I heard the wind outside and it made the boards on the roof groan. At first I thought I heard footsteps upstairs, but I told myself it was just the old structure settling. I pulled out my DSLR and attached my wide-angle lens. I set my camera bag down and unzipped it. Furthermore, I flipped on the camera's power and tested my flash. My heart was beating a little faster than usual. It worked fine, but the sudden light made me blink. There's a certain thrill in capturing images nobody else has taken. I love taking photos in locations like this. I told myself it was just excitement. Nothing seemed strange. The flash lit up the walls and I saw flakes of paint drifting down. I adjusted my camera settings for low light and took a few shots of the hallway. I moved through the first floor, snapping shots of old furniture and broken windows. The pictures looked sharp enough. I checked the display. Furthermore, I took a close-up of some shattered glass and a dusty mirror. The mirror still had cracks in it, but the reflection was visible. I knelt near a table covered in debris. I tried to photograph my own reflection to get a dramatic effect. When I checked my camera screen, I noticed something odd behind me. It was a faint outline of what looked like a figure, but it was blurry. There was nothing there. I narrowed my eyes and looked over my shoulder. It was just an empty room. I kept walking, taking pictures every few steps. I assumed it was a trick of the light or some smudge on the mirror. There was a kitchen area in the back. The counters were torn apart, and a few cabinets hung by their hinges. It smelled stale. The sink was full of rusty water. I clicked a few shots of the sink and turned around to photograph the doorway. Furthermore, I saw something move in my peripheral vision. I tried not to breathe too deeply. It looked like a shadow passing across the far wall. It looked like a ship. I spun around, heart thumping. There was nothing. I pointed my flashlight at the wall. The wind outside picked up again, and the whole place creaked. I thought maybe it was just stress from being somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. Furthermore, I checked my watch. I started to feel a tightness in my chest. Furthermore, I took a few more shots of the kitchen, including one of the warped old refrigerator doors. Furthermore, I decided I'd be in and out in under an hour. Furthermore, I heard a faint scrape behind me, like a chair sliding on the floor. Furthermore, I turned fast, but I didn't see a chair. It was just bare floor and some scattered debris. I swallowed hard and forced myself to breathe slowly. I moved on. Furthermore, I found a narrow hallway leading to a small bathroom. The door was half off its hinges. I nudged it open with my foot. The smell of mildew was strong, and there was a broken toilet on its side. The mirror above the sink was shattered. I raised my camera and took a picture with a flash. There was a large chunk missing, so I couldn't see my entire reflection. As soon as the flash went off, I heard something creak behind me. I whipped around with the flashlight. Again, there was only an empty hallway. I looked at the camera display. My reflection in the broken mirror seemed normal. It looked like part of a shoulder and a head, but it was transparent. But on the right side of the shot, near the bathroom door, there was a shape. My throat tightened. My first thought was that I'd captured some weird reflection or maybe a lens flare, but it looked too much like a person. My hand shook a bit as I stepped back into the hallway. I tried to blow it off, but I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. I decided to check the second floor. Maybe I'd get some better shots up there and then I could leave. As I climbed the stairs, each step creaked under my weight. I kept my flashlight trained on the steps to make sure they didn't collapse. I heard faint tapping sounds behind the walls like pipes knocking. Furthermore, I tried to keep my mind on the photos, but I felt a tingling at the base of my neck. My mouth went dry. At the top of the stairs, I saw a long corridor with several rooms on each side. Some doors were closed and others were ajar. The hallway carpet was torn and covered in dust. I took a few photos aiming the flash down the hall. That's when I noticed a shape at the far end. It was just for a split second as the flash went off. It looked like a figure standing in the doorway. But when my eyes adjusted, I didn't see anyone. My chest tightened again. I started thinking maybe someone else was in the house. I kept telling myself it had to be a squatter or another photographer. But the place felt empty and I hadn't seen signs of recent activity, like fresh footprints or leftover trash. I walked toward that doorway. My footsteps sounded too loud on the floor. My legs felt tense. I tried not to think about that shape. When I reached the doorway, the room was dark. The curtains were drawn and the only light I had was from my flashlight. There was a large bed frame with no mattress. I could see bits of stuffing and cloth on the floor. There was an old dresser against the wall missing half its drawers. I raised my camera and took a series of shots. The flash lit the room in short bursts. With each burst, I felt like something was flickering at the edge of the light. I stepped over to the dresser. The surface was covered in dust, and there was a small hand mirror lying there. The glass on the mirror was intact, but it was cloudy. I aimed my camera at it and snapped a close-up. When I checked the display, I saw a face reflected in the glass. It wasn't mine. It was a pale face with hollow eyes like someone standing next to me. My stomach flipped. I swung my flashlight around the room, breathing hard. There was no one there. My hands started shaking so much that I had trouble holding the camera steady. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. My mind started racing. I asked myself if I was losing it. I rubbed my palms on my jeans and told myself to keep calm. Furthermore, I considered leaving right then, but I wanted to see if these weird images would keep appearing. It felt like a mystery. Part of me was terrified, but part of me was curious about what my camera was capturing. I wiped sweat off my forehead and forced myself to stay a bit longer. I went back into the hallway. Furthermore, I noticed a door at the very end. It was closed. I tried the knob. It turned, but the door was stuck. I shoved my shoulder into it. It burst open with a loud crack. My heart jumped. I swallowed, stepped inside, and found a smaller room, maybe an office or a study. The window was boarded up, so the room was pitch black except for my flashlight beam. There was a big wooden desk in the center, covered in dust and spider webs. I took a breath, raised my camera, and snapped a few pictures of the desk and the walls. When I looked at the screen, I saw faint shapes at the edges of the frame. There were 2 or 3 of them, barely visible, like silhouettes made of mist. They looked like people standing in the corners. My chest felt tight. I pointed my flashlight at the corners. I saw nothing but peeling wallpaper. Furthermore, I felt the hair on my arms stand up. My mouth was dry and my temples throbbed. I took another picture and the shapes seemed closer, like they had moved in a split second. I jerked back and bumped into the desk. Furthermore, I dropped my flashlight and it rolled across the floor. My camera strap was still around my neck, so I didn't drop that, but I had to scramble to pick up the flashlight. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I flicked the flashlight around. The corners were empty, but I felt a presence. My mind went blank. I muttered a few curses under my breath and backed out of the room. I stumbled into the hallway. Furthermore, I told myself I needed to leave. Furthermore, I could barely keep my breathing steady. Enough was enough. As I hurried back toward the staircase, I kept hearing small sounds around me. A click here, a scrape there. It felt like something was following me. I made it to the top of the stairs and aimed my flashlight down. The steps seemed to stretch out, like the descent was longer than before. I forced myself to move, step by step, trying not to trip on the broken boards. My heart raced. My shirt stuck to my back. I whipped around. My camera swung and bumped my chest. I heard what sounded like light footsteps behind me. The hallway was empty, but the temperature felt even colder. I thought I saw a faint movement in the corner of my eye. I pointed at the flashlight. I practically jogged down the last of the steps, skidding on dust and debris. Nothing. My foot caught on a loose board and I almost fell forward. I dropped to one knee, cursing under my breath. I pushed myself back up and shone the flashlight around, panting. The front room was quiet. The same dusty furniture and broken windows greeted me. I felt the tightness in my stomach again. The only exit I knew was the window I'd pried open. The front door wouldn't budge from inside. I turned left, then right, trying to remember which way I'd come in. My pulse was hammered. I spotted a kitchen. I remembered going through the kitchen, so I headed that way. Furthermore, I reached the kitchen, scanning the area with the flashlight. I found the hallway that led back to the front window. The door leading outside was blocked by a heavy board nailed across it. I had to squeeze by a broken dining table and a stack of rotted chairs. Shut. It didn't look hammered. Furthermore, I reached the window, only to see that the board I had pried loose was mostly back in place. I felt panic tighten my chest. It looked like it had been gently pushed back so that the gap was smaller. I gripped the board and tried to yank it. It squeaked as I pulled, and it came loose again. I took a step back, lifted my camera bag, and squeezed through the opening. I almost fell onto the overgrown grass outside. Furthermore, I sucked in the fresh air and felt my heart pounding like crazy. My palms were slick with sweat. I turned and pulled the board back in front of the window, not sure why I even bothered. My shoulders were tense. I walked around to the front yard, shining my flashlight on the old facade of the house. The windows were all dark. The place looked dead and still, but my gut churned. Furthermore, I kept glancing behind me, expecting to see someone on the sidewalk. I felt like something watched me from inside. I went straight to my car, which I'd parked a block away. No one was there. When I reached the car, I fumbled for my keys. The street was silent except for a stray cat digging in a trash can. My hands shook so much that I dropped them once. I got in, locked the doors, and tried to steady my breathing. The air in the car felt hot and suffocating. So I rolled down the window a crack. I looked at the camera on the passenger seat. Part of me wanted to delete every photo I'd taken, but I couldn't do it. I needed to see them on a bigger screen. Furthermore, I started the car and drove away. I needed to figure out what those shapes were. My chest was tight, and my throat felt dry. Every time a streetlight cast a shadow on the sidewalk, I jumped. I took the quickest route back to my apartment. I rushed upstairs, locked the door, and set my camera on my desk. Furthermore, I hesitated for a minute, then turned on my computer. My pulse still hadn't settled. I transferred the photos and opened them on my monitor. One by one, I clicked through them. Most were normal, but then I reached the ones from the bathroom. Mirror. The shape of a person's shoulder and head was there, almost translucent. I zoomed in. No detail on the face, just a faint outline of a jawline, and some darkness where eyes should be. I clicked the pictures in the upstairs hallway. In one shot, there was a silhouette at the far end. Then I saw the study photos. In the next shot, it was gone. The corner images were even worse on a bigger screen. Each one looked humanoid but transparent. I could see 3 distinct shapes. They appeared to be leaning forward as if watching me. When I clicked to the final shot in that sequence, they were closer, almost in the center of the frame. My chest, cramps. The shape in the middle had what looked like an arm reaching out. I felt sweat bead on my forehead. I realized my hands were trembling. Furthermore, I shut off the monitor. Furthermore, I stared at the black screen trying to calm down. Furthermore, I haven't shared these pictures with anyone yet. Furthermore, I'm not sure what to do with them. People love a good ghost story. Part of me thinks they might be worth a lot. I remember the face in that little hand mirror. But every time I look at them, my stomach knots. I keep remembering how cold the house felt, and how the boards creaked behind me. It was close to me, but I never saw it in person. I still don't believe in ghosts, at least not in the usual sense. But those images show something I can't explain. I keep thinking about how the board over the window was put back, almost like the house didn't want me to leave that easily. Now, whenever I lie in bed, I feel like someone's standing by my bedroom door. Sometimes I get up and check my phone's flashlight. There's never anything there, but I can't shake the feeling that something followed me out of that place. I'm not sure if I'll ever open them again. I saved the files on an external drive and locked it in a drawer. Maybe I'll forget about them someday, but every time my phone buzzes or my floor creaks, my mind goes back to that old house. I don't think I'll ever do urban exploration by myself again. I can't walk into a place like that without thinking about those shapes. And I get a jolt of fear, like a static shock running through my chest. It's those faces I couldn't see until after the flash. I can still feel that cold air on my neck when I think about it. And I keep expecting to see one of those silhouettes right behind me, just out of sight, waiting for me to take another photo. I was sitting behind the wheel of my old truck, rain hammering the windshield without pause. My hands were tight on the steering wheel and I felt a strange tension creeping into my neck, to stretch on forever, and the storm refused to let up. I was soaked in sweat, even though the air inside the cab was cold. The headlights lit up a narrow rural road that seemed I had a deadline to meet and wanted to get through that old back road fast. But something was off from the moment I turned onto it. I noticed strange shapes in the darkness, but I tried to focus on the road. Then I saw her. A woman standing on the shoulder just outside the glow of my headlights. She didn't move or wave. Maybe it was my nerves. I can't explain why I didn't stop or slow down. She stood there with her arms at her sides, looking right at me. Maybe it was the way. Her eyes caught the light for a split second. I looked at her for a moment, then I pushed my foot down on the gas. The woman disappeared behind me, and the road kept going. But something didn't feel right. I felt my heart pounding. My palms were damp, and the wipers thumped at a fast speed against the windshield. Every time a flash lit up the sky, I expected to see her again. The thunder and lightning seemed louder than usual. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the storm or my tired mind. I hadn't slept well in a couple of days. My last delivery had taken longer than expected. The truck's engine rumbled in front of me, and I gripped the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles looked pale. And I was running on cheap coffee and energy drinks. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirrors every few seconds. The darkness behind me seemed to press in. The wind rocked the cab and the rain pounded on the roof. But I didn't see her back there. I told myself to calm down. A few minutes later, I spotted her again. Water sprayed across the windshield and the wipers struggled to keep up. My mind raced. I knew I was risking hydroplaning, but I kept my foot on the pedal. My heart pounded, and my arms felt stiff as I gripped the wheel. The rest area sign was nowhere to be found. The only things around me were trees, fences, and darkness. Rest area, 2 miles. I passed another sign with the same message. I cursed under my breath and felt sweat trickle down my temples. I glanced at the fuel gauge. Furthermore, I had started the night with a full tank, but I had been driving for a long time. The needle was dipping lower than I liked. My thoughts raced. If I didn't find a real exit soon, I might run out of gas in this storm on this strange road. I imagined myself stuck with that woman lurking somewhere in the rain. My heart pounded harder at that thought. Then I saw a faint glow up ahead. It looked like old lights on a pole, maybe part of a rest stop area. I slowed down, trying not to skid, and I pulled into a small clearing. There were 2 flickering lights attached to broken poles. The pavement was cracked and I saw a boarded-up building. That might have been a restroom or an information booth. Puddles covered the ground and the water reflected the weak light in dull patches. I parked the truck and turned off the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab felt heavy, except for the rain drumming on the roof. I looked around, my eyes adjusting to the dark. Furthermore, I put on my jacket, took a flashlight from the glove box, and carefully opened the driver's door. I didn't see anyone. The flashlight beam cut through the dark, showing me wet concrete. The wind splashed rain on my face, and I shivered. Weeds coming through the cracks and old trash on the ground. The air smelled like damp leaves and mud. My boots sank into the wet ground. Water soaked my jeans almost immediately. I walked around the building. The door was chained shut and the windows were boarded up. I saw no sign of the woman. Furthermore, I listened for movement, but I only heard the rain and the wind. I felt a pulse in my neck. Lightning flashed overhead, lighting up the clearing. I aimed my flashlight, but there was nothing. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing near the tree line. My breath trembled, and I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I tried to use my iPhone again, holding it above my head, but there was still no signal. The screen was wet, and my finger slipped over it. I wiped it on my jacket and shoved it back in my pocket. Then I heard something. It sounded like a wet footstep on the pavement. I spun around, aiming my flashlight at the noise. I saw the woman standing a few yards away, near the edge of the light. She was dripping with water, her hair stuck to her face, her eyes locked on mine. I froze. My mouth went dry, and my shoulders tensed. She just stood there, breathing. She didn't speak or move closer. I could see her chest rise and fall. I wanted to say something, but my throat felt tight. My heart thumped in my ears. My body felt shaky, and I was scared of what would happen if she walked closer. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Then I clenched my jaw, stepped backward, and fumbled for the truck door. I kept my eyes on her. She didn't approach. She just watched. I yanked the door open, got inside, and slammed it shut. The windows fogged up with my breath. My hands shook as I jammed the key in the ignition and turned the engine over. It caught on the first try. Headlights swept across the rest area, but I didn't see her in the beam. I shifted into reverse, backed up, and then steered back onto the road. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt every beat in my chest. I pressed the accelerator. The trees and fences streaked by on both sides. I kept my eyes moving, checking the mirrors and the road. The storm was still raging, and the thunder seemed constant. The truck lights reflected off the wet pavements. My chest was tight. I needed to get out of that place, but the road never ended. There were no intersections or signs for any real town. Every few minutes I would see her on the roadside, sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right. There was only the occasional, "To rest area 2 miles" sign, repeated again and again. Each time I saw her, she was closer to the edge of the pavement. At one point, I caught a glimpse of her in my side mirror. She was right behind the trailer, walking along the white line on the shoulder, keeping pace with me, even though I was going at least 50 miles per hour. My stomach churned. I pressed the gas harder, and she vanished into the darkness. But I knew she would appear again. I started feeling dizzy from lack of rest. My eyelids felt heavy and my muscles were tense. I fought to keep the truck steady. My neck ached. I tried to check the time again. I flicked the light above me and looked at my watch. But the clock on the dashboard showed the same numbers as before, as if it hadn't changed. The hands weren't moving. It was stuck on the same moment I had. Glanced at it hours ago. I slammed a fist on the steering wheel. My voice came out in a shaky whisper. "What is happening here?" I scanned the trees for any sign of a different road or a driveway. Nothing. Just the same fence posts and the same weeds. The woman kept appearing, sometimes only for a split second in the headlights. The tension in my shoulders was almost unbearable, sometimes standing still as I passed. My legs were sore from maintaining speed and braking whenever she popped up ahead. My eyes burned from staring at the rain. I lost track of how many hours had passed. The same loop repeated. Endless. I felt a gnawing panic in my chest. Road storm, the rusted signs, and the woman's figure. My throat was raw from breathing hard. My clothes stuck to my skin with sweat. Each time I tried to blink and gather my thoughts, I snapped my eyes open again, afraid I would crash or see her in the middle of the road. My mind was racing with no real solution. Eventually, I saw a small bridge over a narrow creek. The water rushed under it. I recognized the broken railing on the side. I had passed it before. That meant I was driving in circles, or the road was looping on its own. My stomach dropped. My heart felt hollow. I pressed the brakes and pulled over. I listened to the rain on the roof, and I forced myself to take a few slow breaths. Furthermore, I tried to organize my thoughts. My only plan was to keep driving and hope something would change, but that had gotten me nowhere. As I sat there, I glanced out the passenger window. The woman was there, standing at the edge of the road, facing the creek. She had one hand resting on the broken railing. The water raged below. I could hear it even through the storm. She didn't look at me this time. She just stayed there, her shoulders drenched, her hair plastered to her head. My chest felt tight, and my heart pounded in my ears. My mouth was dry and my skin tingled. I wondered if I should step out and try to speak to her, but my body refused to move. My instincts screamed at me to stay inside. I gripped the wheel again, turned the key, and merged back onto the road. The path ahead was the same dark stretch of broken asphalt, and I knew it would go on without any clear exit. The headlights showed the falling rain, and the thunder rumbled. I kept my eyes forward, searching for any sign that the road might end or change. My mind told me I might never see a normal highway again. I pushed forward even though my arms were heavy and my head felt light. The trailer rattled behind me and the engine droned on. I thought about the next mile, the next turn, hoping something new would appear. The woman would keep appearing, closer and closer until I finally accepted. There was no way off this strange stretch of road. But I kept driving, clenching my teeth, ignoring the trembling in my hands, waiting for anything to break this endless loop. The headlights sliced through the darkness. The rain pounded on the windshield and the wind battered the cab. My eyes stayed locked on the blacktop, searching for a way out, but I didn't see any. I only felt the wheels rolling on and on through the storm with my heart hammering. The woman appeared again on the shoulder, closer than ever, her eyes watching me as I passed. I couldn't look away and I couldn't stop. I just drove, caught in a cycle that refused to end. And at that moment, I knew there was no simple escape from that forgotten road. I remember the first night I heard the strange interference on my radio show. It was around 2 o'clock and I was sitting alone in the small studio. I had my usual cup of lukewarm coffee on the table, the same worn-out notepad at my side, and the phone lines opened for any listener who wanted to share a story. The fluorescent light above me buzzed and the old air conditioner rumbled every few minutes. I felt a mild ache in my lower back from sitting in the same chair for hours. I introduced myself on the air, gave a quick rundown of the night's topic, paranormal encounters, and waited for calls. I was used to getting strange stories at that hour, but I never expected anything beyond local gossip and spooky rumors. My name is Lucas, and I run a late-night segment called Midnight. I certainly never expected a voice to break into my broadcast. Mysteries at a small radio station in a quiet town were not a big operation. There's just me in the studio and my friend Marcos in the adjacent control room. The station is a single-story brick building off a narrow road near a field. Though he usually works earlier shifts and rarely stays past midnight, on that night I was completely alone. There's a dusty parking lot in front and a worn wooden door that creaks every time I walk through. Inside, the walls are thin, and sometimes I hear the old pipes knocking behind them. I began the show like always. I leaned toward the microphone, stated the phone number for our call-in line. The phone line stayed quiet for a few minutes, and reminded the listeners to share any unexplained experiences they might have had. I sipped my coffee, which tasted bitter, and stared at the small digital clock on my desk. The second hand blinked in red digits. I cleared my throat, repeated the phone number, and tried not to think about how lonely I felt in that dark studio. Right then, the static came through my headset. It was brief. It sounded like a whisper and then disappeared. I paused, adjusted the volume, and asked if anyone was on the line. No one answered. I brushed it off. Technical glitches happen all the time. Our equipment is old. The microphone stand squeaks when I move it, and sometimes the audio levels drop for no reason. I tapped the dial, hoping to fix any loose connection. Then the phone rang. I glanced at the control panel, saw the blinking light, and pressed the button to put the caller on the air. I greeted them and asked for their name. That's when I heard something I can't quite explain. It was a deep voice, but it wasn't a normal human voice. It sounded like it was right next to my ear even though I was alone. Furthermore, it said, "I see you." Furthermore, it was clear and direct. I felt a jolt in my stomach and jerked back in my chair, almost knocking over my coffee. I checked the line. It still showed an active call, but no one responded to my questions. The voice vanished. I began to sweat. My palms felt clammy and my breathing got heavier. I took a moment to gather myself. Only silence. I asked again if anyone was there. I disconnected the call and decided to move on. Maybe some prankster had managed to do something to the feed. I kept my show going. The air felt cold near the door. I turned on some background music for a moment and took a quick walk around the tiny studio, trying to calm my nerves. I noticed a faint draft from the outside, which made sense because the door doesn't close tightly. I told myself everything was fine. Then the phone rang again. I hurried back, sat down and hit the button. This time I heard a woman on the line. She sounded out of breath. She introduced herself as Denise and told me she had been listening. Furthermore, she asked if I had heard that weird whisper before I picked up. I told her about the previous call. She said she had recognized her own street name, mentioned right before the static cut off. I asked her to repeat that. She said, "That voice said it knew where I lived." Furthermore, I tried to calm her down. I asked for more details, but she said she was scared and wanted to hang up. I felt my throat tighten. She stayed on the line for another minute, explaining that Shed heard loud scratching sounds on her back door, while the voice was on air. Then without warning, the line went dead. I sat there in silence with the phone in my hand, listening to the dial tone. My heart pounded. I tried to reassure myself that it was a hoax, but I couldn't shake the unease. I shifted in my chair and felt a dull ache in my neck. Something about her voice sounded real. I decided to keep broadcasting. I shared the details of the strange calls with my listeners. Furthermore, I asked them to call in if they experienced anything similar. But the next call came in right away. The next caller was a man named Rodolfo. Furthermore, I expected more jokes, maybe some nonsense. He said he worked the night shift at a gas station on the edge of town. He said he didn't believe in any of this paranormal stuff. He told me he was standing outside for a smoke break when he heard the radio from inside the store. But while he was listening to my show, he heard the same deep voice behind him. Furthermore, he rushed back inside. He turned around, but no one was there. While he was talking to me, I heard the store door slam in the background. He yelled something like, "What do you want?" Then all I heard was static. After a few seconds, the line cut out. It rang and rang, but no one picked up. I tried calling him back. I felt my mouth go dry. I looked at the clock. It was 2:38 a.m. My shift was supposed to end at 4 SC, but I considered shutting down early. I stood up and walked to the door of the studio. I opened a crack and peered into the hallway. The hallway was dark, and the overhead lights were off because we rarely use that part of the building at night. All I heard was the faint hum of the air conditioner. I listened for any sounds. I closed the door and locked it from the inside. Then I went back to my seat. I stared at the microphone, thinking about the next words I should say. I tried to grip the arms of my chair to steady myself. The phone rang again. My hands shook. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. My hands trembled as I pressed the button. I heard a burst of static, and then the same deep voice came through. It sounded clearer this time. Furthermore, it said my name. "Lucas, you're not safe." My entire body tensed up. I felt sweat trickle down my forehead. I tried to speak, but my throat felt tight. My heart hammered against my chest. I asked who it was. "Stop asking," the voice said. Then the line went silent. I announced to the listeners that I was experiencing technical issues. Breathing hard, my headphones buzzing with quiet static, I stayed there for a moment. I apologized for the interruptions. My stomach churned. Then I started playing a short music track to fill the silence while I tried to figure out what to do. I felt lightheaded. I took a sip of water from a small bottle on my desk and coughed because I swallowed too fast. Furthermore, I decided to call Marcos, my coworker, even though it was late. I told him about the calls, the interference, and the strange voice. Furthermore, I grabbed my cell phone and dialed his number. It rang a few times before he answered in a groggy voice. He told me to stay calm, keep the broadcast going, and record everything if I could. While I waited, I switched back from the music track to the live mic. He sounded tired, but he promised he would drive over to the station as soon as possible. I said that something unusual was happening. Furthermore, I asked anyone with information to call in. I spoke directly to whoever might still be listening. My voice shook a little and I tried to hide my fear, but I'm sure the listeners noticed. I looked at the phone lines. All 5 lines were lit up. We don't take live calls anymore. Furthermore, we ask listeners to send messages or emails instead. Some people in town claim they still experience strange things during the early hours, but they have no proof. I just know what I heard and how it made me feel. My hands still shake a bit when I think about it, the repeated message in my ears, and the panic in the voices of the callers. I keep telling myself it was a random interference or a cruel prank, but deep down I remember the cold sensation in that hallway. Furthermore, I just hope it never returns. I can't forget it. Furthermore, I took this temporary caretaker job at an old abandoned hotel. The ad said light maintenance, light cleaning, short-term contract, because I was out of work and out of luck. It promised free room and board for a month. That sounded good. Enough for me. I wasn't expecting much. I thought I'd just be sweeping dusty floors and making sure the windows weren't broken. But from the moment I arrived, I felt uneasy. The front doors squeaked, the lobby smelled like stale air, and the place felt too big. Even with the lights off, I noticed my own reflection in the glass front doors. I tried to ignore it, but that was just the start. It looked hazy. I got here on a Thursday afternoon. The person who hired me gave me a quick tour, then handed me an old key and said they'd be back in a few weeks. I remember setting my suitcase down in the lobby and looking around. The ceiling had old chandeliers that didn't work anymore. The front desk was coated in dust. I kept thinking, this place is bigger than I expected. Most of the doors to the rooms were locked. The building had 4 floors, plus an attic, plus a basement. But the main hallway mirrors caught my eye right away. They were tall and framed in ornate gold. The glass looked normal at first glance, but when I walked past them, I felt like my reflection lingered a split second behind my movement. I tried not to freak out. I chalked it up to my imagination. Furthermore, I'd been traveling all morning and I was tired. Furthermore, I dragged my suitcase up a flight of creaky stairs to the caretaker suite. It was a small room at the end of the second floor hall. The bed had a thin mattress, and the walls were a dull beige color. I set my stuff down and decided to explore a bit before dark. The window overlooked the empty parking lot. I wanted to see if any of the lights worked. Furthermore, I flipped a few switches in the hallway. A few overhead lights flickered, but some died right after turning on. Others buzzed loudly. I also noticed a large mirror at the end of the corridor. It was about my height with the same ornate gold frame. I walked toward it, peering closely at my own face. I didn't notice anything strange at first. Then I took a step back and I saw my reflection smiling. I swear I wasn't smiling at all. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. My face was completely neutral, but in the mirror my reflection had a slight grin. I looked away. Furthermore, I told myself maybe I twitched or something and I misread my own expression. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to open a few windows in the hallway. I hoped fresh air would help me calm down. A mild breeze pushed through the corridor, making some old curtains move. That's when I heard a faint scraping sound behind me. The breeze felt good, so I took a minute to lean out the window and breathe. I looked outside, trying to focus on normal things like the parking lot and the overgrown shrubs. There was no one there, just that big mirror reflecting the hallway. I spun around, but in its reflection I saw a dark shape move across the floor. It slid from left to right past the locked doors. It was empty. I jerked my head toward that spot in the real hallway. My heartbeat sped up. I forced myself to walk slowly toward the mirror and look into it again. All I saw was me in the hallway with dusty walls and old carpeting behind me. No dark shape. No movement. I took a few deep breaths and decided to go downstairs. I wanted to check the main lobby again, maybe see if there was a fuse box or something else to do. Anything to distract me. The main lobby had a few tall mirrors near the front desk. I flicked on some lights near the front desk, but they only glowed weakly. Gold frames, elaborate designs, at the corners and old glass that might have been installed decades ago. They all matched the same style. The rest of the area stayed dim. It felt weird to see my reflection in so many angles. I walked. Behind the counter, I found an old ledger, some keys, and a maintenance checklist. I saw check mirrors typed in the list. That made me pause. Why would a caretaker checklist include mirrors? There was also a note about items in the basement must remain locked. That note was scribbled in the margin. I decided to stop looking at that list and just get on with my job. No details, no signature. I grabbed a broom from a nearby closet and swept the lobby floor. While I worked, I kept glancing at the mirrors. My scalp tingles. My chest felt tight and my stomach was tense. I tried to look at my reflection to see if anything was weird. Sometimes it looked normal, but sometimes I thought I saw a flicker of something else in the corner. A shadow that wasn't shaped like me, or a slight difference in the background. I stuck to my sweeping. After maybe half an hour, I started to sweat. I felt like someone was watching me. I kept turning around. Nobody was there. By the time I finished, dusk was creeping in. The front windows showed a red-orange sky. I decided to call it a day. I went back upstairs to the caretaker's suite. I made a quick dinner with some canned beans and crackers I brought, closed the door and locked it. The room had a small fridge and an old microwave that still worked. After I ate, I paced around. I wasn't sure if I should try exploring more or just go to bed early. My nerves felt shot. Finally, I decided to walk around the second floor and see if I could open any doors. I was tired, but I didn't want to sleep yet. Most of them were locked, but I found one that led to a storage closet. I stepped inside, pointed my flashlight around. I saw spare sheets, towels, and a few decorative pieces wrapped in cloth. One was another mirror. It was leaning against the corner. I unwrapped it a bit and saw the same gold frame. The glass was cracked in the corner, forming a small spiderweb pattern. I felt a prickly sensation in my hands. I wrapped it back up and left. On my way out, I heard a low whisper, but I couldn't make out words. It felt like my ears were playing tricks on me. I shut the closet door and hurried back to my room. My breathing was shallow, and I kept telling myself to calm down. I lay on my bed, fully clothed, with the blankets pulled over me. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. I kept thinking about the note on the checklist. Items in the basement must remain locked. I wondered if that had something to do with the mirrors. I planned to check the basement the next day, but I still felt uneasy. My eyes started to drift shut after a while. I had trouble staying awake, and eventually I dozed off. When I woke up, it was early morning. Sunlight peered through the thin curtains. My back felt stiff from sleeping in my clothes. I stood up, cracked my neck, and tried to shake off the grogginess. I remembered my plan to check the basement, so I grabbed a flashlight and went downstairs. The basement door was near the main lobby behind a locked gate. I used the caretaker's key, which fit the lock. The metal gate screeched as I pushed it open. The basement stairs were steep and unlit, so I moved slowly. The basement smells damp. My flashlight showed stone walls and a cement floor. There were some crates and wooden boxes stacked along one side. To my right, I saw a series of old mirrors placed against the wall. My pulse quickened. Some were upright, some leaned at odd angles, and a few had blankets over them. I approached them and lifted one of the blankets. The mirror underneath had a hairline crack near the top. I shined my flashlight on it. I noticed faint streaks, like smudges from someone's hand on the other side of the glass. I spun around. Suddenly I heard a shuffling sound behind me. Nothing moved in the darkness. My reflection stared back at me, but the edges looked strange. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I turned back to the mirror. The corners of the reflection were darker. I thought I saw shapes shifting behind me in the reflection. I flicked my flashlight around again. The basement itself was empty, just the crates and the silent gloom. But in the mirror it looked like something passed between the crates. I stepped back, breathing hard. My shoulders feel tight, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I replaced the blanket. I didn't want to look at it anymore. One of them had a label that said Hotel Inventory, Mirrors. Furthermore, I checked a few of the crates instead. Most were nailed shut, and I didn't feel like prying them open. It looked like this place had a lot of mirrors in storage. That made me uneasy. I had no idea why they need so many or why they'd hide them in the basement. I was about to head back upstairs when I heard a voice. It came from the far corner, near a large mirror that was half covered by a cloth. It sounded like someone clearing their throat or quietly trying to speak. I froze in place, then I took a few cautious steps forward. My flashlight beam landed on the cloth, which shifted slightly. I felt a jolt of panic. I wanted to run, but my curiosity pushed me to lift the edge of the cloth. Underneath, I saw a tall mirror, maybe 7 feet high, with swirling designs on the frame. The glass was dark. I couldn't see my reflection at first. Then it flickered to life, as if it took a moment to catch up. My reflection looked at me, but my eyes in the mirror seemed to shine brighter than normal. That's when I heard a whisper, soft and right next to my ear. It said, "Let us out." My chest tightened and my mouth went dry. My flashlight almost slipped from my hand. My mind raced. I dropped the cloth and staggered back. I hurried to the stairs. Before I climbed them, I felt a sudden pressure in my head, like a headache, but sharper. My vision blurred for a second. I gripped the railing, breathing through my teeth. The pressure faded, so I forced myself to move. I made it back to the first floor and locked the gate behind me. My hands were shaking. I went straight to the caretaker's suite and slammed the door. I paced around for a few minutes, trying to calm down. My heart was pounding. Furthermore, I felt sweat on my forehead. I tried to think logically. There must be some explanation. Maybe the old glass warps images. Maybe the basement has echoes or drafts. But the whisper I heard was clear. I didn't imagine it. Something down there was aware of me. Over the next few days, I did my best to handle my caretaker duties. I swept floors, checked the plumbing, and opened windows for ventilation. Some were cracked, some were dirty. But everywhere I went, mirrors greeted me. Some had sheets draped over them. I started avoiding my own reflection. I felt like each mirror wanted me to look at it, and wanted to grab my attention. Sometimes I heard faint voices. My nights were restless. Once I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but they stopped whenever I turned around. I woke up soaked in sweat with the sound of whispers fading from my ears. I kept the door locked, but that didn't help much with my sense of dread. On my 5th day, I decided to remove a mirror in the 3rd floor hallway. It was a tall, narrow mirror with the same gold frame. I brought a screwdriver and tried to detach it from the wall. While I was doing that, I felt something pull at me from behind. I stumbled and the screwdriver clattered to the floor. I spun around, fists clenched. Nobody was there, but the mirror's reflection showed a dark shape. No features, just a silhouette leaning over my shoulder. It looked like a figure made of shadows. I stared at it, cold sweat running down my temples. My eyes darted back to the actual hallway. Nothing. In the reflection, the shape slowly moved, out of sight. I heard a faint laugh that sounded like metal scraping on stone. My limbs feel weak. My reflection did nothing. I sank to my knees, breathing fast. Then the silhouette in the reflection raised its arm. I could see it clearly, like someone else stood behind the glass. My stomach churned. I couldn't handle it. I grabbed the top of the mirror and yanked. The frame popped off the brackets with a loud crack. The mirror fell forward. I felt a sudden rush of relief. It hit with a dull thud, but the glass didn't shatter. I staggered back, letting it drop flat on the floor. It was like the mirror lost its hold on me once it wasn't upright. My breathing slowed, but my hands were still shaking. I realized then that the hotel's mirrors were just decorations. There were entities trapped behind the glass, and they wanted out. They wanted to use me to walk around in the real world again. They held something inside them. That idea made me feel sick. I shut the door. I picked up the mirror carefully and slid it into a nearby closet, hoping that would keep it from bothering me. I considered leaving the hotel right then, but the contract said I only had to stay a few more days. I also worried that if I ran, and I wasn't sure if I'd get paid if I abandoned the job, those entities might find some other way to follow me, so I decided to endure it a little longer. I stuck to the 1st and 2nd floors, and I tried to avoid looking into any mirrors. I kept myself busy with chores. Every so often, I heard faint whispers or felt a tug at the back of my mind. I tried to resist it by focusing on practical tasks. I swept. Furthermore, I cleaned the windows. Furthermore, I tested all the lights. My appetite went down. When I passed a mirror, I kept my gaze on the floor. My gut stayed tight, and my shoulders felt stiff. I felt a growing aching my temples whenever I was around too many mirrors. I refused to turn around. Once I heard my own voice whisper my name from behind me. I packed my bag and left, by the front desk. On my final day, I woke up feeling shaky, but determined to get out of there, like making sure the side doors were locked and turning off certain breakers. While I worked, I saw reflections move on their own in the corner of my eye. I had a few last items on the checklist. I heard distant whispers begging me to come closer. I ignored them. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to keep moving. I focused on the real world, the dust in the air, the sound of my boots on the floor, the weight of the keys in my hand. My mind felt hazy, and I sensed that something was trying to get inside my thoughts. After finishing, I grabbed my things and stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The windows were dark, and I could see my reflection faintly in the glass door. I took one last look at the building. My stomach tightened when I remembered the shadow I thought I saw the previous day. I pushed forward. I peeked into the dressing rooms. Everything was the same. I noticed a stack of new costumes in one corner of the biggest dressing room. They looked clean, not dusty like the others. It fits my role's description. I walked over and picked up one of the jackets. I wondered who left it there. I rehearsed a bit more that day, doing my lines on stage, waiting for any sign of the mysterious director or stage manager. Nothing happened. When the sun started going down, I switched off the lights and left. No new noises, no shapes. The pattern continued for a few days. It arrived, find a note telling me which scene to rehearse and practice my lines. Sometimes I'd hear faint footsteps or see a flicker of a shadow near the curtains. Other times I'd spot the shape of a person in a balcony seat. Then it would disappear when I moved closer. At the same time, I felt drawn to the place. My nerves were on edge, and I was losing sleep. Something kept me there. Maybe it was a strange sense of duty, or maybe I craved that rush of performing again. I'm not sure. One afternoon, I decided to film a bit of my rehearsal on my phone. I set up the phone on a chair and pressed record. I could hear soft footsteps in the wings. My stomach clenched. While I was on stage, I felt that presence again. My hands shook. When I finished, I ran to my phone and stopped the recording. I forced myself to keep speaking the lines. I played it back in the lobby, standing near a window for better light. I heard my own voice reciting the script. Then I heard a faint whisper I couldn't make out. The hair on my arms stood up. At one point in the video, I saw something pass behind me on stage. It was blurry, but it looked like a person dressed in dark clothing. The whisper on the recording made my chest tighten. I tried to replay it a few times. It sounded like a single word, but I couldn't be sure. It might have been my name, or it might have been something else entirely. I started to sweat. The building felt hot and cramped, so I went back on stage. I wanted to get some air, but I also wanted more proof. I shouted that I wanted to see who was there. My voice echoed. The door slammed somewhere in the distance. Then silence. I found a narrow staircase leading up to the catwalk. I looked around the old set pieces behind the curtain. Furthermore, I climbed it. The steps groaned under my weight. I felt my legs shake a bit because I'm not fond of heights, and the railing looked rusty. At the top, the catwalk stretched over the stage. I shone my flashlight along the path. Furthermore, I saw ropes, old sandbags, and dusty spotlights. Nobody was there, but I smelled something like old perfume. It wasn't strong, but it lingered. I stayed there for a moment, my heart pounding. Then I went back down. A few days later, I arrived at the theater, later than usual. The sun was going down. I noticed a light in the lobby that hadn't been on before. When I entered, I heard faint music coming from the auditorium. It was an old tune, something from a long time ago. It sounded like it was playing on a record. My skin prickled. I followed the sound to the stage. One single spotlight shone in the center again. This time there was no script. This time there was no script on the table. Instead, there was a program with my name listed as the lead. The other roles had names I didn't recognize. The year on the cover was from decades ago. I felt shaky. I walked onto the stage and the music grew louder. Furthermore, I could almost feel someone watching me from the rows of seats. The dust on the stage stirred at my feet. My pulse thundered in my ears. I stood in the spotlight and started speaking the lines from memory. As I spoke, I heard footsteps circling backstage. I didn't stop. The music kept playing. It was slow and scratchy. I reached the climax of the scene, the part where my character pleads for another chance. My voice trembled, but I gave it everything. As soon as I finished, the music cut off. I stood there in the dark, breathing hard. My chest rose and fell with each breath. I listened. Then I heard a single pair of hands clap from somewhere in the wings. I swallowed. My lips feel dry. A voice spoke out, low and firm. It said, again. I froze. That was the first time I heard something so clear. I couldn't see who spoke. The voice was calm but insistent. I answered with a shaky, "Who are you?" I waited, my hands shaking at my sides. No response. I felt something pass behind me. My shoulders tightened and I swung around. There was nothing. The stage lights went out, leaving me in near darkness, except for a faint glow from a small lamp near the backstage entrance. I hurried over and flipped the main switch, but nothing happened. My breath quickened and I could hear my pulse in my ears. I fumbled around trying to find a flashlight. Then the lights flickered back on by themselves. The stage was empty. The program was gone from the table. I left the theater in a hurry that evening. I sat in my car for a while, trying to calm down. My hands were sweating so much that I had trouble gripping the steering wheel. I wanted to leave that job, but the idea of walking away didn't sit right with me. I felt like I had an obligation to finish what I started. Furthermore, I also felt that the presence in the theater wanted me to keep going. It was like we were locked in some strange rehearsal together. The next morning, I decided I would go back and finish the play. I arrived early and stepped onto the stage. I went through each act, line by line, gesture by gesture. Furthermore, I heard occasional sounds. The chair creaking in the darkness, the soft tread of footsteps behind the backdrops. I kept at it, and sometimes that faint music. My voice got stronger. My nerves were still there, but I pushed through. By the final act, I felt a strange energy in the room. The floor felt warmer under my feet, and the lights looked brighter. I delivered my last lines with my eyes on the empty seats. A wave of relief spread through me. The tension in my chest built up, and when I reached the final word, it wasn't loud, but it was steady. I could feel my shoulders relax. Then I heard applause. It lasted a few seconds, coming from all around me. It's like a small group of people clapping from different corners of the auditorium. I didn't see anyone. There were no people in the seats, no shapes in the balconies, but the applause echoed briefly, then faded. I stood there, breathing fast. My skin felt cold. I said thank you, out loud. My voice sounded raw. Then the lights dimmed on the stage. I felt a rush of air, almost like a door had opened and closed somewhere off to the side. After that, everything went silent. Then I picked up my script and walked out of the theater. The aisle main door still stuck a bit, and I had to yank it open. I stayed a few minutes, looking into the empty seats. Outside, the street was quiet. I locked the door behind me. I wasn't sure what I had just experienced, but I felt lighter. My chest no longer felt tight. I sensed that whatever haunted that theater had wanted a final performance. It got one. I never found out who or what was behind those shadows and sounds. I never saw an official director or other cast members. No one contacted me afterward about the play, but I can't forget those days in that dusty place. I can't forget the footsteps in the wings, or that shape in the balcony, or the single voice that said again. When I think about it now, I feel my pulse quicken. I remember the smell of that old theater and the taste of dust when I breathed. I remember the scratchy music playing in the background. But mostly, I remember the moment I finished the final act. That applause felt real. It felt like someone or something was there to acknowledge my performance. After all these years, I still can't explain it. But it happened, and I'm not likely to step onto another stage, quite like that one, ever again. I pushed aside the last branch and stepped into a small clearing. The air felt cold on my face, and I noticed the lingering smell of damp soil. I scanned the area and saw an old wooden cabin at the far edge. The windows were broken and the roof sagged in the middle. I held my breath for a second because I sensed something off about that place. It looked abandoned. I'd come to this forest to study rare insects and birds. I decided to walk closer, and my boots sank into the soft ground with every step. But I hadn't expected to stumble on a structure like this. My name is Daniel, and I've spent most of my career in remote locations. I'm used to traveling alone, setting up camp and gathering specimens without any help. I planned this trip for months. Furthermore, I had a simple goal to catalog a few species rumored to live in this region. so I wanted to be the first to document them. Officially, nobody had confirmed their presence here yet. The forest was thick with tall pines and broadleaf trees I couldn't immediately identify. The ground was uneven, covered in layers of dead leaves, rotting logs, and tangled roots. Everything looked green and brown, except for a few scattered wildflowers. In the distance, I heard birds calling, but I couldn't see them through the dense canopy. I reached the cabin and examined the exterior. The walls had dark stains and deep cracks in the wood. It looked like nobody had lived there for decades. I saw only jagged shards in the frames. The windows lacked glass. The door hung on a single hinge leaning to one side. I was tired from hiking all day, and the thought of setting up my tent didn't appeal to me. I peeked inside, figuring I could at least assess if the cabin was safe enough to spend the night. Inside, I found a single room with a sagging cot against one wall, a broken chair in the corner, and a small table covered in dust. Spider webs clung to the ceiling. A faint smell of damp wood filled the air. When I stepped across the threshold, the floor creaked. I felt a brief surge of caution, but the boards held my weight. I opened my flashlight and shone it around. Dust particles floated in the beam. I figured I could make the place livable for one night. The walls still looked sturdy enough, and I had a tarp in my pack to cover the broken windows if necessary. I set down my backpack, then checked if there were any signs of recent animals inside. I saw some rodent droppings, but nothing that indicated a larger creature had taken up residence. Furthermore, I decided I'd stay, at least to save myself the effort of pitching a tent in the dark. First, I cleared some debris from the corners, pushing aside small sticks and clumps of leaves with my boot. Then I unrolled my sleeping bag on the cot. The cot's frame groaned, but it seemed to handle my weight when I tested it, just in case I wanted to heat a meal. Next, I gathered a few stones from outside to create a makeshift fire pit near the cabin's doorway. I could keep the smoke mostly outside and still get a bit of warmth inside. The sun set fast. By the time I looked up again, the forest was already darker. I heard insects buzzing around, and I heard the occasional rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth. I set up a small propane lantern on the table and struck a match to light it. The lantern cast a pale glow on the dusty walls. I remember feeling a little uneasy for reasons I couldn't pinpoint. Maybe it was the isolation or the way the cabin felt like it was waiting for something. I took out my notebook and tried to jot down details about the species I had seen earlier. My hand kept drifting to the table surface, tapping it because I was distracted by the sounds outside. The forest is never silent. I'm used to hearing branches creaking, animals moving, or wind passing through leaves. But there was something else. At first, I thought it was a loose shutter, except the windows didn't have shutters. I heard soft taps. Then I thought it might be a bird pecking at the wood. It was too consistent, though. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. Like it was following a pattern. I stood up and walked to the door. I aimed my flashlight into the trees. Furthermore, I didn't see anything. Furthermore, I tried to shake off the tension, but there was no wind. Furthermore, I told myself it was probably a branch knocking against the cabin in the breeze. Though my focus wasn't great, the tapping stopped for a while. The air was still, and I felt a light sweat on my forehead. Eventually, I went back to my notes. So I finished writing down everything I remembered. The shape of certain plants, the rough location where I spotted unusual bird tracks, and a possible nest in the hollow of a large oak. After that, I heated the sea. Quick meal over my portable stove. The smell of canned stew filled the tiny space. I ate fast, cleaned the pot, and stuffed my trash away so I wouldn't attract animals. Then I closed the door, propped a piece of broken chair against it, and turned off the lantern to save fuel. I climbed into my sleeping bag and shut my eyes. I thought I'd drift off immediately because I was exhausted. Instead, I lay there, listening to every tiny sound. The walls creaked now and then, and the floor squeaked if I shifted my weight. At some point, I must have dozed because I jolted awake, after hearing a loud bang against the outside wall. My heart pounded, and I sat up. I listened. I felt a rush of cold sweat. At first, there was silence. Then I heard another thump, like someone hitting the wall with an open palm. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the sleeping bag. It was slow, but forceful enough to make the boards vibrate. My mouth was dry. My palms felt damp. I tried to move quietly toward the window, but the floor creaked under my feet. The noise stopped. I paused and waited. Nothing moved. The darkness between the trees felt thick. I aimed my flashlight outside. I forced myself to breathe slower. I tried not to panic. Furthermore, I reminded myself that this could be an animal investigating the cabin. But deep down, I felt that it was something else. Maybe a bear had brushed against the wall. I stood there for several minutes, just listening. My stomach tightened every time I thought I heard a shuffle or a branch crack. Eventually, I backed away from the window and sat down on the edge of the cot. I kept the flashlight aimed at the doorway. Then I heard a soft exhalation. My scalp prickled. I swear I heard someone breathing. I asked, "Hello? Who's there?" I didn't hear a response. My stomach churned. I pressed the gas and drove away from the empty lot. The presence stayed. I sensed motion, like a person shifting weight behind me. Every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, I saw a faint distortion, as if the air was moving in that seat. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but my head wouldn't stop spinning. I drove for a few minutes until it vanished. Furthermore, I felt the seat rise again, as though the invisible passenger had stepped out. My entire body trembled and I couldn't stop looking around. I kept asking myself if I was hallucinating. Maybe I was tired, or maybe there was something else going. Over the next few weeks, it happened more often. Always in remote areas, something would slip into my cab. It flickered for a moment. It wasn't in shape. It was more like the outline of heat rising from pavement on a hot day. I would hear breathing or the faintest rustle of fabric. Then I would catch a glimpse in the mirror, and then went still. Sometimes I heard whispers or soft humming. Other times, I leaned forward in my seat, feeling sweat on my forehead. I heard someone muttering, like they were rehearsing the same sentence over and over, and I wasn't sure who would believe me. I didn't even believe myself sometimes. But I kept driving because I needed the money. I never got used to it. Each time, my pulse raced and my muscles tensed. One night I decided to talk to the presence. I had just picked up the faint shape near it wasn't cold or hot, it just felt different. Closed diner. I felt the seat drop, and the temperature in the cab seemed to change. I kept my voice steady. "What do you want?" I said. I waited. My ears rang with silence. Then I heard a small voice. It was distant and rough, like it came from the far corner of a room. It said, "I'm looking." I felt my throat tighten. I asked, "Looking for what?" The voice grew softer. "I don't remember," it said. Then it faded. After that night, the whispers got clearer. Each new presence had a different tone. Some sounded younger, some older, some were male. Knew they were searching for something. They often repeated the same sentences. None of them ever told me their names. I don't think they remembered. They just, some female. I can't see it. I usually gripped the wheel and tried to respond. "What are you trying to find? Can I help you?" "I need to find it." "Where did it go?" It was like they were trapped in the same loop. There was one presence, stayed longer than usual. I never got a direct answer. They all seemed confused and lost. It entered my cab near a lonely stretch of road by the railroad tracks. I felt the usual drop in the back seat. Then I heard a slow, shallow breathing followed by a deep sigh. I waited a moment before speaking. My voice trembled. "Can you hear me?" The presence answered, "Yes." Its voice was raspy, like it hadn't spoken in a long time. It paused. I heard another sigh. I tried to breathe, through my nose to calm myself. I asked, "What do you want tonight?" "I want to feel normal," it said. My arms tensed. My chest felt heavy. "What do you mean by normal?" I said. The presence let out another sigh. "I don't remember how things felt. I need to keep moving. I can't stop." I heard rustling as if it was shifting closer to my seat. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I asked, "Where do you want me to take you?" The presence replied, "Anywhere. Just keep driving." So I drove. I passed the empty factories. I passed silent gas stations with flickering lights. My mind raced with questions, but I pushed them aside. I listened to the presence's breathing and tried not to panic. After 10 minutes, the presence spoke again. "I used to have a place," it said. "There was a corner, near a window. It smelled like coffee. The air was warm. I remember music in the background." Its voice sounded so distant, like it was forcing out the words through a blocked passage. I wanted to ask more, but the presence fell silent. A few minutes later, the seat rose. The invisible passenger was gone. I heard a faint pop like air leaving a balloon. Then I realized my own breath was shaky and my mouth felt dry. I pulled over at a convenience store to catch my breath. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the empty back seat. It looked normal. Nothing was out of place. My arms were covered in goosebumps, and I noticed my hands had sweat on them. Night after night, the pattern continued. Sometimes I had 3 or 4 rides with invisible passengers in a single shift. Other times I went 2 or 3 nights without one, but they always came back. They were all restless and uncertain. They all seemed desperate, something they couldn't define. I tried adjusting my routes, picking up real passengers and being busier parts of town, but eventually I'd have to drive through a quiet stretch. That was when it happened. A few times I thought I saw a faint glow in the corner of my eye. It never lasted long. That was when the seat dipped and I heard breathing or whispers. I tried to keep calm, but my body reacted every time. My muscles clenched and I got metallic. Taste in my mouth. I had trouble sleeping during the day because I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was watching me. One evening around 3 in the morning, I was driving through an older neighborhood with narrow streets. The streetlights were spaced far apart. The houses. Everything seemed dark. I cruised along, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. My heart was pounding, even though I didn't see anything. Then I heard a voice behind me, loud enough to make me jump. It said, "Please turn right." I jerked the wheel slightly before. I caught myself. My pulse skyrocketed. I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" I asked. Voice didn't respond. It just repeated, "Please turn right." So I turned right into another darkness. Street with tall hedges on both sides. The passenger whispered again, "Go straight." I drove slowly and could barely see anything ahead. My headlights lit up old asphalt and patches of weeds. The voice said, "Stop here." I hit the brakes. The engine hummed. My hands shook. I could hear my own breathing. The seat behind me sank a little more, like someone was leaning forward. Then I felt a soft touch on my shoulder. It was light and cold. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest. I heard the voice again, very close to my ear. "I don't see it here," it said. There was a slight tremor in its tone, like sadness or frustration. I tried to speak, but my throat felt tight. "What are you looking for?" I managed to say. The voice paused. I heard faint breathing, then it whispered, "I don't know." I sat frozen, my eyes locked on the empty street ahead. The seat behind me shifted and the presence vanished. The cold touch disappeared from my shoulder. My body felt stiff and a wave of nausea hit me. I took a few moments to compose myself before driving away. At times the invisible passengers shared small details from whatever existence they remembered. A few of them mentioned a house with blue walls or a living room with an old sofa. One talked about climbing stairs and feeling the wind on a balcony. Another mentioned a favorite scarf. They never explained why they were in my cab. They didn't talk about family or friends or any real event. Furthermore, they just seemed stuck in there. Search. I could hear the desperation in their voices. It made my skin crawl, but I also felt a strange sympathy for them. Hands on the wheel and focus on traffic lights or speed limits, but it never worked. The presence behind me always made itself known through a sudden whisper or a change in temperature. They sounded lost. Sometimes I tried to ignore them. I'd keep my me. My heart would race, and my thoughts would spin. I kept my eyes straight ahead, but that prickling sensation on the back of my neck never went away. One night I turned up the AC full blast, hoping the noise would drown out any whispering. That just seemed to make them speak louder. Another time I tried playing loud music. The passenger in the back seat started humming along, even though I didn't see any shape there. My skin prickled at that one. The tune was off-key and I could hear it behind the song on the radio. Eventually I gave up trying to block them out. There was one occasion when I pulled into a gas station to get a coffee. I parked near one of the pumps and left the engine running. As I reached for the door handle, I felt a sudden cold blast from the back seat. I froze. I heard a rough voice that said, "Don't leave me alone." My chest felt like it was tightening and I realized I was holding my breath. "I'm just getting coffee," I said. Furthermore, I yanked my hand away from her handle. The voice repeated itself, sounding panicked this time. feeling foolish for talking to an empty seat. It sounded trapped, like it was caught in some loop. I felt sorry for it. The voice repeated, "Don't leave me alone." But I also felt my stomach twist in knots. I stayed in the car. Furthermore, I waited for a minute or two, but the presence didn't speak again. Then the seat felt normal and the air changed. I got out quickly, looking around in case someone was watching me talk to myself. Nobody was there. The station was nearly empty. My legs felt wobbly as I walked inside and poured coffee into a foam cup. My hands shook, and I spilled some coffee on the counter. That night I drove home at dawn. The sky turned gray, and I could see the normal world waking up. The clerk gave me a strange look, but I just wiped it up and paid. Past few weeks, my body felt stiff and wired at the same time. I stared at the back seat. It always felt jarring. I parked my car in my building's lot and sat there. The street was quiet. I was exhausted, and my mind buzzed with all the voices I'd heard over there. It stayed silent. Eventually, I climbed out and locked the doors. I felt relieved to be away from the cab. Part of me expected to see a faint outline or hear a whisper. Every time I get in the driver's seat at night, I brace myself. My mouth goes dry and my palms sweat. I wonder which passenger will show up. Will it be the one who breathes hard and mutters about losing something under a couch? Or the one who asks me to stop in random spots for no reason? Or maybe a new one with a different voice and a different secret? I don't know why they come to me. Sometimes I think they see me as a guide, but I'm just a guy trying to make a living. I can't help them, and they never explain it to me. Situation and detail. They all repeat the same pattern, searching for something. Not sure what, stuck in confusion. A few nights ago, I decided to ask direct questions. "Why did you come to my taxi?" I said to a presence that had just settled in the back seat. It was silent for a moment. Then it spoke in a quiet voice, almost a whisper. "I see a light," it said. I frowned. "What light?" I asked. It just repeated, "A light," then grew quiet. I kept driving, and the presence faded away after about 5 minutes. It didn't clarify anything, but the mention of a light made me wonder if there was something about me or my cab that drew them in. That line of thought made me uneasy, so I tried to push it out of my head. The weird thing is that none of these passengers were ever harmed. They left me shaken, but not hurt. They just seemed desperate. Furthermore, they were stuck in some loop. Also, I couldn't prove any of this, repeating their searches and their confusion. I thought about calling a paranormal investigator, or maybe a priest, but I'm not the religious type. I didn't have a camera that showed them. Any recording I tried just picked up static or a faint wind sounds, so I keep driving. I keep picking up my real fares. Then in between, I pick up these invisible fares that come out of nowhere. I wonder if one day I'll finally learn. My chest is tight, my eyes are tired, and my stomach aches from too much coffee. What they're missing, but so far they never find what they want. Tonight, I'm sitting in my cab near the airport waiting for a call. The radio is off. I'm listening to the rumble of jets in the distance. I'm still looking in the rearview mirror every minute or so. The seat is empty right now, but I know that could change at any moment. I feel a slight shift in the air, and I hold my breath. I wait. Nothing happens. I exhale. This is my life now. I drive my taxi through the darkness, picking up real passengers and invisible ones. The invisible ones climb in silently, whisper their half-remembered stories, and leave with no warning. They're stuck searching, and I am stuck listening. I can't see them, but I know they're there. That's the only truth I have. I start the engine and pull onto the street. It's another night on the job, and I can't stop, wondering if the next turn will bring another drop in the back seat. The caretaker led me through a narrow hallway and unlocked a set of heavy double doors. Another voice. Another round of questions that never have an answer. I arrived at the old mansion on a Monday afternoon, catalog the books in the neglected library, and leave everything in good order. He explained that my job was simple. He gave me the keys, wished me luck, and disappeared. Another room. I stood at the threshold and felt my stomach tighten. The windows were covered with thick drapes, and the only light came from old lamps that cast weak orange circles across the floor. I set my bag on a small desk near the entrance. There was a noticeable temperature drop in the place smelled of dust and stale air. Stacks of books leaned against wooden shelves. Library. My skin prickled with goosebumps. and I rubbed my arms. I checked the nearby radiator, but it was cold and silent. I told myself it was just a draft in an old building. Furthermore, I turned on a few table lamps and took a quick look around. The shelves stretched from one end of the room to the other, with small aisles in between. Many books looked ancient there, bindings cracked or covered in dust. Some had titles in languages I didn't recognize. Others had no titles at all. Detailed catalog. As I walked between the shelves, I heard a slight rustling sound behind me. I turned quickly, but I didn't see anything. My muscles felt tense. I started my first round that night, taking notes with a pencil and a notepad. I wanted to create a quick inventory of what I was dealing with before starting any. I told myself it was my imagination. I continued writing down what I saw. Old encyclopedias, journals, some thick volumes on local history, a few on obscure topics. The air felt still. There was no wind. The only noise was the faint scratching of my pencil against paper. After about an hour, I headed back to the desk and placed my notes in a neat stack. I noticed that one of the tall shelves near the far wall had a slight tilt, like it was leaning forward. My eyes burned a little from the low light, so I decided to bring a stronger flashlight next. Today, the caretaker had given me free rein to work at any hour, but I felt more comfortable working. I made a mental note to check it later. At night, for some reason, it seemed quieter, and I liked the idea of focusing on my task, without interruptions. That first night, nothing obvious happened aside from a few odd noises. I went home with a mild headache. I thought it might be the dust or the strain on my eyes. Furthermore, I returned the next night with a thermos of coffee, a larger flashlight, and a small duster to clear off the worst of the dirt. Once again, I unlocked the library doors and stepped inside. The lamps were off, so I turned on the ones near the entrance. I was holding my breath. I walked to the same desk and noticed something out of place. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. The silence was overwhelming, and I realized a small piece of paper lay on top of my notes. My notes were exactly as I had left them, except for the addition of this paper. It had a few strange symbols scrawled on it. They didn't look like proper letters, more like quick scratches with a pen. I held it up to the light, but I couldn't make sense of it. I felt a slight tremor in my hands. Furthermore, I placed the paper in my bag, thinking maybe the caretaker had left me a message or something. I dusted the spines of a few large volumes and opened one at random. But why would he leave random symbols? I tried to shrug it off and continued my catalog work. It contained diagrams of unfamiliar shapes, and the text was in a language I didn't read. The pages felt thick and rough, like handmade parchment. There were no publishing details, no author names. I wrote down its location and closed it. I heard a quiet thump to my left. My heartbeat sped up, and I moved the flashlight beam in that direction. I saw a hardcover book lying on the floor. It must have fallen from the shelf. I walked over, picked it up, and placed it back on the shelf. The label on the spine was faded, so I couldn't read the title. Every so often, I paused and listened. I kept working for a few more hours. The silence felt heavier than before. My ears started picking up every tiny sound. My own breathing, the gentle hum from the lamp, the creak of the floorboards. I felt a slight pressure at my temples. When I finished that night, I locked up and went home. On the walk back, I kept replaying the moment I found the paper. I couldn't explain it, and it made me uneasy. On the third night, I decided to be more systematic. I planned to finish the inventory of the main shelves. Then I checked the smaller alcove in the back corner of the library. When I arrived, I immediately looked at my desk. My notes were there, but now 2 more scraps of paper sat on top of them. One page had a series of random letters that seemed scrambled. Both had similar odd markings. The other had circles and lines that reminded me of a rough map. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. Furthermore, I walked around the library calling out. "Is anyone here?" My voice echoed. I touched them, expecting them to feel wet or smudged, but they were dry. I checked the entrance to see if there were any fresh footprints on the dusty floor, but I couldn't see anything. I tried to keep working. No answer. But my mind was all over the place. I felt jumpy. My hands shook every time I heard a tiny noise. I kept glancing at the aisle behind me, sure I'd see someone watching. The tilted shelf had shifted more, like it was about to tip over, but there was never anyone there. Later that night, I noticed a tall, I pushed against it gently, but it was stable enough. The wood felt rough under my fingers, and I could see deep scratches on the side. It looked like something had dragged sharp edges across it. I felt a lump in my throat when I saw those marks. My chest felt tight, and I forced myself to breathe slowly. I stayed longer than usual that evening, trying to push through my nerves. I told myself it was just an old building, maybe with some hidden draft or an unsteady foundation. Around midnight, I started hearing a quiet scraping sound. I aimed my flashlight around the aisles. The table was empty except for a thick layer of dust. The noise stopped when I got close. Nothing moved. I followed the sound to an old wooden table in the back. My heart thumped in my chest and a light sweat broke out on my forehead. I couldn't explain it. I tried to calm down, focusing on the catalog work. My mouth felt dry and I kept swallowing to clear my throat. I moved to the next row of shelves, writing down titles and checking conditions. When I reached the last book on the row, it refused to slide out. It was stuck. I tugged. It was a bit harder, and the entire shelf rattled. I stopped immediately, afraid of the whole thing would collapse. Then I noticed that the back on the shelf had a small latch. It was hidden behind a stack of dusty encyclopedias. I pulled the encyclopedias aside and flicked the latch. A panel at the back on the shelf clicked open. I shined my flashlight inside. It was narrow. Passage. The space looked cramped. I hesitated for a moment, then squeezed through. The passage. Smells of mold. The walls had old bricks. Damp too. The touch. I inched forward until I found it. A small chamber with a low ceiling. My head almost touched it. There was a single wooden box, resting on a stone ledge. The box was covered in dust and had a lock, but the lock was broken. My hands were slick with sweat. I wiped them on my pants and lifted the lid. Inside there were several sheets of parchment covered in the same weird symbols I had seen on those scraps of paper. Some had notes in pencil, like someone tried to translate them. They were partial, words in English, but nothing made sense. Gate, beyond. My pulse hammered in my ears. I picked up the sheets and noticed a small leather-bound booklet beneath them. It had no title. I opened it and saw handwritten entries. The penmanship was uneven, and the ink had bled through the thin pages in places. It was all about rites, invocations, and references to dark secrets. The words were blunt descriptions of some hidden knowledge. I felt a twisting sensation in my gut as I flipped through. My breathing became shallow, my head felt light, and my skin tingles with anxiety. I slid everything back into the box and closed the lid. My mind buzzed with questions. Was this the forbidden knowledge the caretaker mentioned? In passing, I remembered him telling me that the mansion had a long, complicated history, and that some things were better left untouched. I felt a surge of panic and an odd curiosity. Part of me wanted to take the box and study everything in a bright, open room. Another part, I wanted to shove it all back and pretend I never saw it. My heart pounded, and I felt sweat trickle down my back. I carried the box out of the passage, set it on a nearby table, and took a few photos with my camera. My hands were shaking, and I didn't know if the photos would turn out. Then I heard movement near the entrance to the library. It sounded like footsteps on the wood floor. I turned off my flashlight and stood still. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. I strained to hear anything else. The footsteps stopped. My heart throbbed in my chest, and my muscles felt tight. I forced myself to move back toward the desk. When I reached it, I realized the light from the lamps had dimmed like someone had turned down the power. My eyes struggled to adjust. I looked at my notes, and they were in disarray. Some pages were scattered across the floor. My pencil was snapped in half on the desk. The tension in my neck was almost painful. My stomach felt cramped, and I felt a wave of dizziness. I reached for a bottle of water in my bag and took a few gulps. My throat was raw, and the water tasted metallic on my tongue. I looked around again, then spoke out loud. A shaky voice. I'm just here to do my job. I'm leaving soon. Furthermore, I felt stupid talking to an empty room, but I had the sense that something heard me. The oppressive silence returned. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. My legs felt weak, and my hands twitched at my sides. I gathered my scattered notes, stuffing them into my bag without bothering to organize them. I grabbed the camera, the tape recorder, and the box from the hidden passage. Furthermore, I didn't want to leave it behind, although I had no idea what to do with it. Furthermore, I stepped toward the library doors and heard a distant scraping sound like nails dragging on wood. It made my skin crawl and I picked up my pace. When I reached the doors, I fumbled with the keys for a moment. The doors were stuck. My pulse pounded in my temples and I pulled hard. Finally, they gave way with a sudden jerk. I stepped out into the hallway and shut doors behind me. My shoulders relaxed slightly and I let out a long breath. I locked the doors and hurried toward the main entrance of the mansion. I didn't stop to check if the caretaker was around. Furthermore, I just wanted to get out. Furthermore, I reached my car, sat inside for a minute, and tried to settle my breathing. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel and my forehead was damp with sweat. My chest felt tight, and I kept thinking about those scraps of paper and the weird book my mind was buzzing with. Confusion and a growing fear. I started the engine, drove away, and didn't look back until I was several blocks from the property. Even then, I felt as if something was behind me, watching. I still have the box. I haven't told anyone about it yet. Furthermore, I haven't returned to the library. The caretaker called once to ask how the catalog was going, and I said I needed a break, because I was feeling sick. He didn't push me, he just said to let him know when I was ready to continue. I think he knows something, but he won't say. I keep the box locked in my closet at home. Sometimes I hear faint scratching from inside, like the pages are shifting around on their own. I can't explain it, but it makes my pulse jump every time. That's the truth of what happened in that old library. I don't know if I'll finish the job. I haven't found a logical explanation for the notes, the rearranged books, or the presence I sensed every night. The forbidden knowledge in that hidden passage scares me, but it also pulls at my curiosity. I keep telling myself, we'll go back to finalize the catalog and hand over the files. But part of me worries that furthermore, if I step into that library again, I'll never leave the same way I entered. For now, I'm staying away. The memory of that silence still makes my heart race. I still remember the jolt I felt when I first heard the whispers coming from that dark corner of the abandoned factory. It was around 2 in the morning. My shift had started at midnight, and the place was always dead quiet by that time. There was no wind that night, no passing cars, and no other people on the property. The only noise I ever heard was my own breathing. But that night, there was something else. It caught me off guard, and the sound got inside my head before I could even process what it was. I work alone because this factory was shut down years ago. The company went bankrupt, and all the workers disappeared from the place. My boss got the contract to watch over it, just to keep vandals out and make sure nobody stole the remaining equipment. People around town always said there was something off about the property. I never believed any of that until I started my rounds there. I figured it was just old talk from folks who wanted a good story to share at the bar, but after that night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I remember standing in front of the main entrance, checking if the lock was secure. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness and lit up the rusty metal door. Everything seemed fine. Then I heard a soft murmur. It sounded like someone talking, but the words weren't clear. I froze for a second. I turned my head, trying to pick up the direction of the noise, but it vanished as soon as I moved. I told myself it was my imagination. I had done the same routine hundreds of times without trouble. Furthermore, I went back to making my rounds, but a tight feeling settled in my stomach. Furthermore, I walked through the central aisle of the factory. The place was huge. Broken machines were scattered around, and the smell of old metal and damp concrete filled the air. My boots scraped against the floor, making small echoes in the open space. Normally that echo comforts me because it's the only sign of life I have in there. But I noticed my footsteps sounded hollow, like something else was absorbing the noise. It was subtle, but it bothered me. I kept turning around to see if somebody was behind me. When I got close to the far side of the building, where an isolated storage galley stood, I heard faint whispers again. It came from the direction of that smaller warehouse. Sits off to the side of the main structure. It's a building nobody uses, not even for storage. The place looks older than the rest of the factory. The walls are grimy, and the doors are warped from years of neglect. I always found it odd that it was still there. Normally they would have demolished a useless structure to save on property, taxes or something like that. But for some reason this old warehouse stayed. I tried to shrug off the noise, but curiosity got the better of me. My heart thudded in my chest as I walked over. My flashlight caught a glimpse of something. Looked like a faint shape slipping through the door. I stopped and stared. I had never seen anyone around the factory at that hour, and I've never noticed any sign of squatters. I felt a chill crawl up my neck, and I could hear my own pulse hammering in my ears. I moved closer, gripping. My flashlight is like a weapon. I raised it in front of me, not sure if I was about to confront reality, person or something else. When I entered that small building, the air was different. It felt thick, like the atmosphere was pressing down on me. The light from my flashlight flickers a bit, which made me nervous. I changed the batteries before my shift, so there was no reason for it. To act up, I forced myself to keep moving. I saw random debris on the floor, broken wood, scattered nails, and old metal scraps. The ceiling dripped in a few spots, creating a constant tap on the concrete. My boots felt heavier with each step, like I was dragging my feet through invisible resistance. I followed the corridor inside that building. It was narrow, and the walls had stains that looked darker than simple mold. My flashlight caught a glimpse of something strange. Markings on those walls. They were shapes carved into the concrete, rough and uneven. They didn't look like gang tags or typical graffiti. Furthermore, they reminded me of old symbols you might be seen in a history book, but I didn't know what they meant. My stomach twisted into a knot when I realized they formed a pattern leading toward the back of the warehouse. Suddenly, I heard another whisper. This time I was sure it came from directly in front of me. It sounded like multiple voices speaking at once, but in the same hushed tone. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. My mouth went dry, and I tried to swallow, but it felt like my throat was constricted. I took a deep breath and forced myself to push forward. The last thing I wanted was to turn around and run, only to leave the door wide open for something to come out after me. I reached a large empty room near the end of the corridor. The floor was covered in dust, and the ceiling had holes that let in small beams of moonlight. My flashlight began to flicker again, so I tapped it with my palm. The beam steadied for a moment, revealing a circle of old burnt candle stubs on the ground. In the center of that circle, I saw a rough chalk drawing. It looked like more of those strange symbols. They all connected in a spiral. My hands started shaking, so I gripped the flashlight tighter to keep it steady. The temperature felt much colder than the rest of the building, like I had stepped inside a fridge. As I stood there, I noticed I was faint. Footprints in the dust around the circle. They looked recent, maybe a day or two old. The size was hard to determine, but they were definitely human footprints, or at least they appeared to be. My mind raced. Maybe some group broke in to do weird rituals. The thought alone made my skin crawl, but I told myself that was the logical explanation. People do strange things when they are abandoned places. I crouched down to get a closer look. I didn't touch anything, but I showed my flashlight on the drawings. The lines were shaky, like they were drawn by someone trembling or in a rush. The candle stubs were partially melted into the floor. Wax had formed uneven lumps around them. The smell in that space felt heavier, like stale incense mixed with rotting leaves. I heard another whisper, but it was closer this time, almost at my ear level. I spun around, shining the light at the corners of the room, but I saw nothing. My heart pounded, and my breaths turned shallow. I felt a growing sense of panic. I had never encountered anything like this in my life. Years as a security guard. Usually the worst I deal with is a trespassing teenager or someone trying to strip copper wiring to sell. This was different. I told myself to stay calm. I tried to rationalize it as some leftover materials from local thrill seekers, but I felt goosebumps on. My arms wouldn't go away. My mind kept jumping back to that whisper. It sounded too real to dismiss. I thought about calling my boss, but my cell phone had no signal inside it. The building, that wasn't unusual. The reception was always spotty in the factory. I decided to head back toward the entrance to see if I could call from outside, but as I started to leave, I heard a shuffle behind me. It sounded like feet scraping the floor. I spun around again, shining my flashlight. Nothing was there. My nerves were on edge, and my chest felt tight. I could barely think straight. I said out loud, "If someone's here, you need to leave." My voice sounded shaky to my own ears, which made me even more uneasy. No one answered. The only sound was my heartbeat throbbing in my head. I backed out of that room, slowly, not wanting to turn my back on the place. As I made my way into the corridor, I felt like something was watching me. Every few steps I whipped around, expecting to see a figure behind me. I didn't see anyone, but the sense of being followed grew stronger. I could almost feel the heat of a stare on the back of my neck. My muscles tensed and a ache started in my shoulders from keeping them hunched up in defense. Once I got outside that small building, I stood there trying to catch my breath. My mouth felt dry and my lips were cracked. I looked around to see if there were any signs of movement, but the courtyard was empty. The main factory building loomed in the distance, dark and silent. I checked my phone. I had one bar of signal, so I tried to call my boss, but the call didn't go through. I sent him a short text saying I found signs of trespassing. The message struggled to send, then finally went through. He didn't respond right away, so I moved on. I forced myself to finish my round. The rest of the factory was the same as always. Broken equipment, rust and darkness. But the entire time I felt this pressure on my chest. I couldn't shake the idea that something was in that isolated warehouse, something that wasn't just a person messing around. Once I completed my sweep of the main building, I went back to the security office near the front gate. It's a small room with a desk, a chair, and a few old ones. Monitors hooked up to security cameras that cover most of the factory exterior. None of the cameras point to that isolated warehouse though. The people who set up the system must not have cared about it. When I sat down, I realized I was sweating. The night was cool, so the sweat was from pure nerves. My throat felt tight, and I could still hear echoes of those whispers in my head. I tried to concentrate on the monitors. I looked for any sign of movement, but everything stayed quiet. I felt alone and exposed in that little security room. The walls are thin, and the door doesn't even lock properly. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting the door to swing open. After about 20 minutes, my phone finally vibrated. My boss had texted back, telling me to note everything in the log, and that he'd come by in the morning. I stared at the message, feeling frustrated. I wanted someone else to show up right then, but that wasn't going to happen. I was on my own until sunrise, so I got up, grabbed a bottle of water from the small fridge, and tried to calm down. My nerves were still shot, but I didn't want to sit there doing nothing. I decided to go online on my phone for a moment. I typed the name of the old factory, plus the word rituals, just to see if anything popped up. My signal was weak, but eventually some old news clippings showed up. Most were rumors, but a few mentioned that the land used to belong to a local group that practiced occult ceremonies. There wasn't much detail. One article said the group was disbanded a long time ago. Another said the site had been linked to some strange activity before the factory was built. I scrolled through half-loaded images, but didn't see anything definitive. The more I read, the more tense I felt. I realized it matched the weird symbols in the circle of candles I had found. It made me wonder if someone was trying to disturb whatever was left behind. My skin crawled at the thought of more people coming back. Continue those rituals. I looked at the clock on my phone and saw that it was only a little after 3 in the morning. I had hours to go before my shift ended. I sat there tapping my foot on the ground, trying to decide if I should do another round before dawn. Part of me wanted to stay in that security room until the sun came up, but a bigger part of me felt I needed to make sure nobody was still hiding in that warehouse. I didn't like the idea of being surprised, so I grabbed my flashlight and stepped back outside. The wind had picked up a little, rustling some loose sheets of metal on the property. The rattling sound made me jump. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and headed back toward that smaller building. As I approached, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I was pretty sure I had pulled it shut when I left. Furthermore, I stopped, my heart pounding in my ears. My palms felt clammy and my breathing turned shallow again. I wanted to turn around, but I forced myself to walk closer. I nudged the door, with my foot shining my flashlight inside. The corridor was empty, but the darkness felt like it was moving. My eyes kept playing tricks on me, making me think I saw silhouettes sliding along the walls. I took a few steps inside. My throat felt tight again, and each breath felt like a struggle. I called out, "This is security. If you're here, come out now." My voice echoed, but no one answered. I heard a dripping sound somewhere in the distance, probably water leaking. I walked in, feeling my knees tremble. My flashlight flickered again, which made me pulse spike. I shook it, and the light steadied. Then I followed the corridor back to that large room with the circle on the floor. The candle stubs were still there, but the footprints the dust looked different. They seemed smudged, like someone had dragged their feet over them. I heard another soft whisper that echoed around the room. My stomach turned, and I felt a wave of dizziness. I scanned the entire space with my flashlight, seeing only the walls and the floor. Nothing moved. My fingers were numb from clenching the flashlight too hard. I kept swallowing, trying to get some moisture in my throat, but my mouth stays dry. I noticed a metal door at the far end of the room. It was partially open. I hadn't seen it before because it blended in. The wall. I walked toward it. My boots scraped over the floor, stirring up dust. The door led to a small closet-sized space. Inside, I saw a stone slab leaning against the wall. It looked out of place, almost like a piece of old architecture. There were more symbols carved into it. I ran my fingers over the edges, feeling the rough texture. The whispers grew louder in my ears, even though I couldn't see anything else in that cramped area. My legs felt like they were about to give out, so I stepped back into the larger room. At that point, I couldn't stay there longer. The fear felt too intense. My body was screaming at me to get out. I left the building, making sure to close the door behind me. I hurried across the property back to the security office. Once I got inside, I locked the door as best I could. Even though the lock was flimsy, I sank into the chair, my hands shaking. I watched the monitors and listened to every small sound outside, bracing myself for more whispers. But the rest of the night passed without any more disturbances. When dawn finally broke, I felt some relief. The sunlight eased the tightness in my chest. I stayed in the security office until my boss arrived. When he walked in, I told him about what I found: the warehouse, the candles, the symbols, and the whispers. He gave me a skeptical look, then said he'd call some people to check it out. I could see he wasn't entirely convinced, but he saw how shaken I was. He said he believed I found something, though he wasn't sure what. I was just glad I made it through the night in one piece. I never forgot that feeling of standing in that cold, dark space, seeing those strange shapes on the walls. I still work as a guard, but I asked for a different location after that. I couldn't keep going back to the same spot, hearing those voices at night, feeling the air press against my skin. I don't know what really happened there. Maybe it was just some local group pulling weird prank, or maybe there's more to that old story about occult rituals on that land. Either way, I don't plan to find out. And that's the truth of what I went through. Plain and simple. No decorations, no embellishments. Just the raw account of the night that changed how I look at empty buildings forever. I still remember the quiet hum of the ventilation system on that first night when I realized something was wrong. I was standing in the middle of the empty lobby, my tie loose around my neck, looking at the elevator doors. The time was a little past midnight, and I felt a pressure in my chest that wasn't there before. I didn't see anyone else. The security guard in the lobby had left for his usual rounds, and the cleaning staff had clocked out hours earlier. The fluorescent lights flickered every once in a while, and the place smelled like stale coffee and industrial cleaner. I pressed the elevator button without much thought, but as soon as the doors slid open, I felt a rush of cold air. It made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I stepped inside, and that was the beginning of everything I'm about to share. I'm an executive at a finance company. Furthermore, I usually work late because there's always a new project or a report to finalize. I don't have much of a social life. My routine is simple. I arrived. Around 8 in the morning, I deal with meetings all day, then stay after hours to finish things I can't get done otherwise. I'm used to being one of the last people in the building. The lights are on. Most floors go off by 9. The only people who stay are a few IT guys, sometimes a project manager, or a security guard who might be dozing at his desk. I never felt nervous about being alone there. The building is tall, the hallways are usually silent at night, and I'm used to it. That changed. Around a week ago, I had stayed until midnight, finishing an analysis for an upcoming client pitch. I packed up my laptop, slid some folders into my briefcase, then headed for the elevator. The hallway was dim. A single overhead light flickered in and out, and I felt a small twinge of anxiety, but I ignored it. I got to the elevator, and I saw all the floor indicators above Doors were dark, except for the number 35, which was my floor. That made sense because I was calling. It is from the 35th. The doors opened and I stepped in. The interior smelled like old metal and something sour. I don't recall smelling that before. I pressed the button for the lobby, and the doors closed. The elevator jerked once, and then started moving down. I checked my watch and thought about what I might grab to eat on my way home. It's the usual routine. Watch the small screen above the door as the floor numbers. Blink in descending order, but that night it stopped at floor 29. The display said 29. But the elevator didn't open. Instead, the lights inside flickered. I was alone in that small box, waiting, feeling my pulse pick up. My breath got shallow. I pressed the door open button, and nothing happened. I waited a few seconds, looking at the control panel. The overhead light buzzed and flickered again, and the elevator started moving down. I tried to shrug it off, moment as a glitch in the system. When I got to the lobby, the doors opened normally. Everything looked the same, maybe a little darker than usual because half the lights were off at that hour. I walked out and saw nobody around. The security desk was empty, a single lamp shone on the countertop, revealing a few logbooks and a half-eaten sandwich. I whispered a hello, expecting the guard to pop out from somewhere, but I heard nothing. I walked outside, got in my car, and drove home, trying not to overthink the elevator stalling at floor 29. I am convinced it was a random malfunction. The next night, I was in the office again until late. The hours went by fast. I remember stepping into the elevator again around the same time. This time the panel above the door showed random numbers flickering. It would switch from 15 to 22 to 34 in a strange loop. I thought it was broken, so I hesitated before stepping in. When the doors opened, there was that cold rush again. My arms tingle and I feel a tiny drop of sweat trickle down my temple. I told myself it was nothing, so I got in. I pressed the button for the lobby and waited. The elevator started moving, but the display showed no numbers. It was blank. I felt my heart beating harder, and I glanced around for a service phone inside the panel. I found the small door that usually hides the emergency phone, and I opened it. There was nothing inside, just an empty slot. I stood there, the overhead light flickering. The elevator slowed. My stomach tightened. I tried to guess what floor it would open on. After a moment of silence, the doors slid open. I looked out at a hallway I had never seen. The sign on the wall said 28, but it didn't look like the 28th floor. The lighting was different. The walls had a strange texture, and the carpet felt thin and rough. I stepped out cautiously. The corridor was silent. The doors closed behind me before I could react. I heard a faint mechanical hum moving off into the distance. I turned around and pressed the call button on the wall, hoping the elevator would come back. The button lit up, but I didn't hear anything. I walked down the hallway, hearing the soft thud of my shoes on that carpet. There were doors on each side. No signs, no nameplates. I tried a doorknob. It turned, but the door was locked from the inside. I tried another door, same thing. I felt my pulse, throat. The air smelled damp and stale. The overhead lights buzzed in a steady rhythm. At the end of the hallway, I heard a low clicking noise. It reminded me of someone drumming there. Nails on a table, but it was more rapid. I slowed my steps and tried to stay quiet. I approached the corner, and I glimpsed a shape moving in the next corridor. It was bent over, arms too long, legs that seemed to jerk at odd angles. My throat felt tight. I stepped back for a moment and pressed my spine against the wall. The clicking sound continued, and I realized it was coming from the creature. It was tapping its fingers on the walls as it walked. I could hear each tap like nails on wood, even though the walls were some kind of painted drywall. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. Furthermore, I forced myself to breathe through my nose, trying not to make a sound. My eyes started to water. I felt an urge to scream, but I clenched my jaw. Then I heard a faint hiss from behind me. I turned slowly and saw another shape near the far end of the hallway. This one was slightly shorter, with a wide face and a slack jaw. Its skin looked pale under the overhead lights, and it had small black eyes, blinked without any emotion. I stood there, caught between two hallways and two creatures that seemed to be exploring this floor. I spotted a door labeled stairs near me. I took a quick step toward it, turned the handle, and slipped inside. It was dark in the stairwell, but I could see the steps going up and down. I let the door close carefully, and I listened. The tapping continued outside, then it faded. The hiss from the other side also faded. My heart pounded. My breath came in shaky bursts. I wiped the sweat off my forehead with my sleeve. I was on some version of the 28th floor, but it wasn't the one I recognized. I didn't know how to get back. Furthermore, I tried the stairwell doors on a few different levels, but they were locked. The stairwell signs didn't look familiar. The numbers were either missing or scratched out. I went up 5 flights before I found another elevator door in the stairwell. It was a small metal door with an elevator access sign. I pulled it open and saw a service elevator inside. There was a panel, a single button, and an empty space where the emergency phone would normally be. I stepped in and pressed the button. The door closed, the lights flickered, and I felt a drop in my stomach as it descended. I tried to steady myself by leaning against the wall. I stared at the control panel. No numbers, just a single button. The elevator slowed, and the doors slid open. I found myself in the lobby. At least it looked like the normal lobby, with the same reception desk, the same rows of plants near the entrance, a small light behind. The desk illuminated a sign-in sheet. I took a breath and stepped out. I looked around. Furthermore, I saw the same half-eaten sandwich as the night before. Furthermore, I hurried out of the building. Furthermore, I got in my car and I drove away as fast as I could. Furthermore, I told myself I would never stay like that, late again. But work piled up, and within a few days I was back in my office past 9. I kept glancing at the clock, hoping to finish and leave by 10 at the latest. By the time I wrapped up, it was almost 11. My heart sank when I stepped into the hallway and saw the elevator doors at the end. They seemed to invite me with a strange glow. The overhead bulbs. I debated taking the stairs all the way down, but that felt stupid because my office was on the 35th floor. Still, I thought about it. In the end, I told myself I was being irrational, so I went to the elevator again. The panel above the doors was normal. Time. Just the number 35 lit up, waiting. The doors opened and the interior lights looked the same as they always did. I stepped in with my briefcase in hand. The inside smelled like stale air. I pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator jerked slightly and then started its descent. I kept my eyes on the panel above the door. It counted down: 34, 33, 32, 31. I relaxed a bit. Then it stopped at 30 and the doors opened. The hallway outside was dark. There were no overhead lights, just a faint glow from the elevator shining a few feet into the corridor. I saw the shape of a table against the wall. I heard a faint rustling noise like cloth scraping against the floor. My stomach tightened. I pushed the door close button. The doors shut, and the elevator continued. When I reached the lobby, I ran out as soon as the doors parted. The security desk was empty, again. The lighting was dim. I checked the front entrance. It was unlocked. I walked out, breathing hard, trying not to drop my briefcase. Outside, the air was cool, and I felt a sense of relief. I noticed a single guard near the parking lot entrance. He was leaning against the wall, smoking. I walked over and asked why the lobby was empty. He just shrugged and said the main thing. Guard had stepped out. I didn't ask any more questions. I just left. The next few nights, I had trouble sleeping. I kept imagining those strange hallways and the creatures tapping and hissing in the dark. I tried telling a coworker about it once, hinting that the elevator might be malfunctioning. She said building management had performed routine checks, and everything was normal. I decided not to push the subject. I didn't want to sound ridiculous. A few days later, I stayed until midnight again. It was the only way to finish my work. When I called the elevator, I stood to the side, gripping my briefcase so hard my knuckles turned white. The doors opened. I stepped in. I pressed the lobby button. The elevator went down as usual, stopping at a few floors when people pressed the button from the outside, but nobody got on. Each time the doors opened, the hallway was empty. No lights, no people, nothing. One floor had a loud buzzing sound. Another had water dripping somewhere. My stomach hurt and sweat formed. My temples. I pressed the door closed button each time, wanting to reach the lobby as fast as possible. When I finally got there, the guard was actually sitting at his station. I rushed past him and nodded. He gave me a strange look, but didn't stop me. Gripping the steering wheel so hard, my hands started to cramp. I felt a pounding in my head. That lasted until I went to bed. Over the last few nights, the pattern has repeated. The elevator shows me floors I don't recognize. Sometimes it's a quick glimpse of an empty corridor with flickering lights. Sometimes I step out into a hallway that loops around in strange ways, leading me in circles until I find a service elevator. I see shapes that watch me. Some have wide eyes, some have no eyes. I hear tapping, hissing, and the sound of something heavy scraping. Across the floor, my body reacts with a cold sweat, rapid breathing, and shaky legs. I push my way back to an elevator. I press every button until something takes me down. To the lobby again. Then I escaped. I've tried using the stairs from my office to the lobby, but the door's locked from the inside after the cleaning staff leaves. I've tried waiting for it. A coworker rode the elevator with me, but I ended up staying later than everyone else anyway. My boss demands these late reports. My fear hasn't gone away, but I keep convincing myself I can handle it, that maybe it's all in my head. I avoid direct confrontation with those creatures, but I see them at the edge of my vision. Their movements are jerky. Some have elongated arms, or strange postures. They seem to guard the floors that appear only after midnight. I don't know if they want me to leave, or if they want to keep me there. I only know that each time I see them, I feel a rush of panic. My throat gets tight and I can't speak. Sometimes I can't even swallow. Tonight I'm finishing my final report for the quarter. It's 11:50 p.m. The office is silent. I can hear the hum of a vacuum cleaner in the distance, but it fades away after a minute. The cleaning staff is almost done. My hands are shaking as I type these last lines. I keep glancing at the clock, dreading the moment I have to press that elevator button again. I can't stay here until morning because the building locks down completely at 1. If I stay, I'll get stuck. If I go, I might end up on those strange floors again. I don't know how long I can keep doing this. Every night the elevator seems to pull me deeper into those corridors. Every night I see things that shouldn't exist. I feel the walls closing in. My breathing gets shallow and my heart races. My mind screams for me to stop working these hours. But I have a deadline and I can't quit my job. I have no proof of what I've seen, and nobody would believe me anyway. Yet every time I press that button, I wonder if I'll come back. Right now I'm shutting down my computer. I'm putting my files in my briefcase. My shirt is damp under the arms. My pulse is racing. I can't ignore the reality of this anymore. I have to leave. The elevator is waiting and I need to hope it takes me where I want to go. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I just know that once the clock passes midnight, the building becomes something else, and I'm the one who's been foolish enough to explore it. I'm heading there now, listening to the echo of my footsteps in the hallway. My throat is tight, and my skin feels cold. The elevator doors are in front of me, closed and silent. I reach out to press the button and my finger trembles. I feel that wave of dread washing over me again. It's time to see if I can make it back. I want to start by saying this. I never asked for a transfer to that lighthouse. Furthermore, I had no idea what I was getting into when I got there. On the boat that morning, the wind smelled like salt and decay, and the trip lasted longer than I expected. The boat's engine coughed the entire way, and the pilot barely said a word. He just pointed off to the distance whenever I asked about the island. When we finally arrived, all I saw was a narrow beach, a rocky slope, and the old tower rising on top of it. It didn't look inviting. The paint on the lighthouse was chipped, and the iron railing around the top was covered in rust. The only person I met that day was the man who dropped off supplies. He nodded once, told me good luck, and then steered the boat around and left. I've never felt so alone. In here because my supervisor decided I could handle an isolated post. Furthermore, I've worked in lighthouses before, but never one so far from the mainland. The logbook said the place used to have 2 keepers, but budgets changed. They gave me a few boxes of canned food, some old radio equipment, and the promise that someone would come by every other week to restock me. I felt a knot of worry in my gut right away, but I kept telling myself it was just another job. I'm not a guy who panics easily. Furthermore, I'm used to it, to quiet nights and the sound of waves against the rocks, but I had no idea what was waiting for me. Once the sun went down, on my first day I unpacked everything. I found a small bunk in a room near the bottom of the tower. The walls smelled damp. I heard the drip of water in the corner, where there was a hairline, crack let in the humidity. I checked the generator behind the building. It ran on diesel. There were 2 barrels of fuel, both about half full. I tested the light upstairs. It took a bit, but it turned on and spun as expected. The lens was old and the rotation motor made a harsh grinding noise. I checked the radio. The speaker crackled, but I managed to receive it. Faint signal. So far, it was just another neglected lighthouse. Night came and I decided to do it. Standard watch. I climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room. The steps were steep, and my thighs burned by the time I got to the top. I switched on the light and sat on a stool behind the big glass lens. I could see the dark ocean surrounding the island. The beam swept across the water. Sometimes I saw small flecks of foam. Mostly I just saw endless black. I tried to keep myself alert, but nothing happened for hours. The wind whistled outside, and the small windows rattled in their frames. It felt cold. Eventually I decided to go down, grab something to eat and try the radio again. The static was louder at night, but I heard no voices. No passing ships reached out. No distant stations. Just that crackle in my ears. I went to my bunk around midnight. I woke up 2 hours later to a strange light outside. My pulse started pounding and I sat up straight. I saw a faint glow seeping through the small window. In my room, it wasn't the beam of the lighthouse. This light flickered greenish-white, and it seemed to move. I felt a chill spread across my back as I realized it was coming from the beach below. I stood, grabbed a flashlight, and slid into my boots. The air in the lighthouse felt damp against my skin. I walked down the hallway and unlatched the door. As soon as I stepped onto the rocky path, I noticed the wind had died. Everything felt still, except for that floating glow down by the water. I walked carefully toward the shore. I heard the waves lapping at the sand, and I tasted it, salt on my tongue. I got about 20 yards away from the water and aimed my flashlight. At that moment, the greenish-white glow faded. The beach looked empty. I scanned the flashlight, beamed back and forth, heart thumping. The sand looked flat and smooth, except for a few sets of footprints. At first I thought they were mine, but then I realized they were bigger, spaced differently. My chest tightened. I moved the beam up and saw no one. The sky was overcast, and the ocean had a dull sheen. The footprints led up the beach, headed toward the rocks near the lighthouse. I followed them for a while, feeling my palms sweat and my breathing go shallow. Suddenly the prints just stopped at a patch of pebbles. There was no indication of where they went. The trail didn't curve and it didn't lead into the water. It ended as if whoever made them disappeared. I felt my stomach tense. I shone the light around but saw no movement. My mind started racing. I thought maybe I was half asleep, imagining things. But when I placed my boot next to one of them, those prints, I saw a real indentation, probably made by something heavier than me. I realized I was shaking. I rubbed my forehead, forced myself to take a breath, and decided to head back to the lighthouse. I spent the rest of that night sitting in the kitchen, listening to the silence. The flashlight stayed on the table. I kept glancing at the door, worried I'd hear a knock or footsteps outside, but nothing else happened. When morning light finally came, I walked back out to the beach. I expected to see footprints, but the tide had wiped the sand clean. No sign of anything. I felt exhausted, but I forced myself to check the entire shoreline, then the path near the rocks. All I found were gulls squawking overhead. My clothes felt sticky with sweat. I had a headache from lack of sleep. I spent the day pacing around the tower, double-checking the supply shed and reorganizing the radio equipment. It kept my mind off the weirdness. That night I tried to convince. I've just seen some natural phenomenon. Maybe it was a patch of bioluminescent algae. Maybe the footprints were old. I went through every possibility in my head, but none of them felt right. When darkness fell again, I made sure all the doors were locked. I turned on the lighthouse, beamed, then stayed up in the lantern room, watching. Around 2 in the morning, I saw it again. From the vantage point up top, I noticed the glow start just beyond the breakers. It drifted toward the beach like a slow, steady light. My throat went dry. I hurried down the steps, stumbling a bit in my rush. This time I grabbed the old binoculars hanging on a hook near the door. I shut the door, behind me and jogged toward the edge of the cliff that overlooked the beach. When I raised them, binoculars, I saw 3 figures. They moved in a line, heads bent forward, walking slowly through. The surf, water pooled around their ankles, and they left a trail of footprints behind. A pale glow spread around them, like an aura. I felt my heart hammering in my chest. They wore what looked like dark clothing, drenched from the ocean. I couldn't see their faces. Their steps were synchronized, like they were marching. I watched as they moved onto the sand and continued toward the lighthouse. My hands trembled so much that the binoculars shook. I lowered them and took them a step back. My breathing sounded loud in my ears. Part of me wanted to run, but my feet stayed planted. I decided to go down to the beach. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining things. Maybe I just needed to see them up close. I scrambled down a narrow path, nearly slipping on the wet rocks. The sea breeze pressed against me, and the flashlight beam trembled in my grip. As I got closer, I saw the glow again. It was stronger. Now, bathing the figures in that same greenish-white light, it made the wet sand glisten. I called out, "Hello?" My voice came out shaky. They didn't reply, they kept walking. I moved the flashlight beam onto them and caught a glimpse of wet arms and torsos. No faces showed. It felt like I was looking at shadows. My heart pounded so loud it hurt. I took another step and the beam flickered. The flashlight made a buzzing sound. Then it cut out. Darkness surrounded me and I froze. I still saw the glow in front of me, but my flashlight was dead. I heard a faint hissing noise, almost like static. My ears started to ring. I stepped backward, and my boots sank into the sand. I struggled for balance. My pulse was racing. I tried to turn away, but I felt compelled to look. The figures passed by me, not even touching me. Up close, I noticed the air got colder. I heard them breathing, but it sounded wet and uneven. I wanted to speak, but my mouth was too dry. Furthermore, I just stood there staring. When I looked back, I saw them moving toward the lighthouse. The glow moved, with them lighting up the base of the tower. I couldn't move right away. My legs felt weak. After a few seconds, I forced myself to follow. As I neared the foot of the tower, my flashlight flickered back on for half a second, then died again. The only light was that greenish glow. I saw their footprints pressed into the sand, going right up to the lighthouse door. Then right before my eyes, the glow dimmed, and the figures faded into the darkness. They vanished like they were never there. My heart thundered. I was sweating, and my stomach felt like I might vomit. I grabbed the doorknob, found it locked, and rushed inside. I stayed awake until sunrise, pacing around the small living area. Furthermore, I avoided the windows. My radio wouldn't pick up anything but static. It felt like my mind was reeling. When morning arrived, I went outside to look for tracks. This time I saw footprints around the door. I could see droplets of water on the stone walkway. I followed the tracks around the corner, and they stopped against the old stone wall. There was no path leading away from there. I reached out and touched the stone. It felt damp. I looked around for any other sign, but found nothing. Over the next few days, I tried to stay calm. I wrote down everything. In a separate notebook, I detailed the time, the weather, how many figures I saw, their direction, and the color of the light. During the day, I checked every inch of the island. The place was small, just a ring of jagged rocks around the beach and the tower. I found a small cove on the far side, but there were no signs of boats or hidden huts. The supply boat came once, and I wanted to ask the pilot about the strange lights, but he just threw the crates on the sand, said he was behind schedule, and left. I felt like a fool standing there, not sure how to bring up something so bizarre. The figures kept coming. Some nights there were 2, some nights 3 or 4. They always appeared in that drifting glow, somewhere beyond the breakers, then walked onto the sand, past the lighthouse, and vanished before dawn. Sometimes I stayed locked inside and just listened. I heard soft footsteps outside, faint, sloshing of water, and that distant hissing static sound. My chest would tighten. My arms would prickle with goosebumps. I kept a flashlight handy, but it often flickered and lost power. Whenever the glow got near, I tried using extra batteries. I tried using the backup lamp from the supply locker. The effect was always the same. My technology seemed to fail. When those figures were around, I started feeling physically exhausted. My appetite disappeared. I could feel tension in my shoulders all day. My eyes stung from lack of sleep. I'd doze off, sometimes then jerk awake, worried I'd hear something at the door. One night I felt bold, enough to try taking photos. I found an old camera stashed in a drawer, a cheap digital one. The memory card was small, but it had some space left. I waited in the lantern room for it. The glow appeared, then rushed down to the shore. I snapped photos in quick succession, hoping one would come out. I saw the flash reflect off that eerie light, but the camera froze. It wouldn't let me view the images. The next day I checked the card, and every shot looked corrupted, just static and streaks. That sent a chill through my bones. I tried every rational explanation I could imagine. I wondered if it was some kind of trick, maybe smuggler special gear, but I never found any contraband or hidden stash. I wondered if it was a weird reflection of the lighthouse beam, but the color was wrong and the figures left footprints behind. One night I climbed onto the rocky cliff to watch from above. I witnessed the same process, a glow in the waves. Shapes walking onto the shore, heading for the tower, then dissolving into darkness. My heart pounded so hard I had to crouch down and catch my breath. I felt shaky, like my body couldn't handle the adrenaline anymore. After a couple of weeks, my eyes were sunken and my hands shook during the day. Every time I tried to call for help on the radio, it fizzled and went silent. The supply boat didn't show up on schedule. I felt trapped. The night seemed longer. I started counting the hours until sunrise, but time dragged. Each evening I'd sit in the kitchen, with the lantern lit, chewing on stale crackers just to keep my jaws moving. My stomach churned with anxiety. It felt like the place was wearing me down bit by bit. I forced myself to keep it routine. In the morning I'd eat something and then do maintenance tasks. I'd check the fuel for the generator, see if the light worked, and make notes in the official lighthouse log. I tried to ignore it. The footprints I would sometimes find near the door. They were always wet, often large and deep. I would clean them up and then stand there, feeling my pulse racing. The sense of being, the watch never went away. Even in broad daylight, I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing behind me. One night I decided I'd try to confront them. I was tired of cowering indoors. I prepared a strong flashlight, wrapped a spare battery pack around my waist, and grabbed a wooden club I found in the shed. Around 1 in the morning, I spotted the glow. I marched down to the beach, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The glow bobbed on the water surface. Then I saw 4 figures emerge. They moved slowly toward me, leaving trails in the wet sand. I raised the flashlight and it died instantly. My wooden club felt slippery in my hand. I took a step forward, but my knees trembled. I tried to shout, "Stop!" My voice cracked. They came close, maybe 10 feet away. I heard them, breathing, that wet rasping. The glow hurt my eyes, and the hair on my arms stood on end. I felt a deep chill in my limbs. My body refused to move, like I was stuck at that moment. Then the glow started to fade. The air felt thicker, my chest tightened, and I stumbled backward, nearly losing my balance. Before I could steady myself, they were gone. One moment I saw them reaching the rocks near the lighthouse, and the next, nothing. No footprints. No glow, no sound. I felt my pulse pounding in my neck. My breath came in short gasps. I realized I couldn't do anything to stop them. I couldn't touch them or photograph them. Furthermore, I couldn't even speak to them. They just appeared, walked past, and vanished. Each time they left, footprints or wet patches as proof that something physical was there. But they never stayed until dawn. They never tried to break in. They never showed hostility, but their presence made me skin crawl. By the end of my stay, I was a mess. I slept only during the daytime for a couple of hours. Hours. Every night I'd see that glow and those figures. My mouth went dry every time. My hands trembled from fear. My heart pounded so hard, I worried it would give out, but they were never harmed. Me. They just marched along the beach, up to the tower, and vanished. Eventually, the relief boat came one morning, and I didn't hesitate. I stuffed my things in a duffel bag, handed them over, lighthouse keys, and left the island without saying much. On the ride back, I stared at the gray water and tried not to think about those footprints or the glow on the waves. Even now, when I recall it, I feel my chest tighten and my stomach twist. I just know what I saw, and it still keeps me awake some nights. I can't explain it, and I'm not sure if I want to. I just hope I never see that glowing light again. I walked into that building on a rainy Tuesday morning, expecting nothing unusual. I had my tool bag in one hand and a folded work order in the other. Furthermore, I was tired, but I felt confident I could handle another routine plumbing job. When I stepped inside, I smelled old carpet and wet plaster. The manager handed me a few keys and said there were leaks in the basement. He was friendly enough, but he spoke fast, and his eyes darted around like he didn't want to be there any longer than necessary. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just nodded, took the keys, and headed for the basement door. I remember thinking that the lights in the hallway flickered too often. I assumed it was bad electrical circuit. I had no idea what waited for me in the depths below. My name is Gary. I'm a plumber, and I've been working in this field for almost 10 years. I've seen my share of flooded basements, busted pipes, and suspicious leaks. I can usually tell when water damage hides something worse. But that day, I missed all the early signs that this building was different. Maybe I was too focused on finishing the job quickly. Maybe I was just tired from the day before. Either way, I pushed open the basement door and started down the concrete steps, humming a quiet tune to keep myself company. The basement smells stale and damp. I saw water stains on the walls, forming dark rings that spread across the exposed concrete. The overhead bulbs buzzed. Their light was weak, and I noticed a few flickering off and on. The manager had told me to find the main valve in the back room. He said the pipes there had been making strange noises and leaking around the joints. I walked through a narrow corridor, stepping over puddles. My boots made splashing sounds that echoed. The sound bothered me a bit because it felt too loud. That cramped space. I finally reached the back room. It looked like a standard maintenance area. There were shelves full of old tools, boxes of spare parts, and a strong smell of metal and grease. The pipes on the ceiling were covered in rust, and some of them dripped water onto them. Floor. I set my tool bag down, took out a flashlight, and shone it around. I saw the main valve near the floor wall. I climbed on a short stepladder to get a better look at the damaged sections of pipe. That's when I heard something that made me pause. I heard a voice say, "Gary." At first, I thought it was my imagination. I switched off my flashlight and stood still. The room was so quiet that I could hear my own breathing. I tried to see if someone was in the hallway. I leaned toward the door, but I didn't see or hear anything else. I shook my head and told myself it was just the old pipes making weird sounds. I flicked the flashlight back on and resumed my inspection. A few minutes later, the voice came again. This time it felt closer, almost right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. My heart pounded. I felt sweaty, gathering on my forehead, and my palms get clammy. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice bounced off the walls. No answer. It seemed ridiculous, but I could have sworn I heard my own name. I tried to steady my breathing. I told myself the basement was playing tricks on me. Old buildings do that sometimes. I forced myself to focus on the job. I replaced a section of pipe, tightened a few joints, and made sure nothing else was leaking. I turned off the main valve for a moment to check the water flow. Everything seemed normal. I was about to climb down the ladder when I noticed a crack in the far corner of the room. It wasn't on the ceiling or the walls. It was on the floor near some old shelves. I hopped down and walked over to it. The floor looked uneven, and I thought maybe there was an opening or a loose panel. I knocked on it with the handle of my screwdriver. It made a hollow sound. The next thing I knew, the floor shifted under my weight and I stumbled forward. I caught myself before falling, but I realized I was standing on a hidden panel. It was made of old wood. It looked like it had been part of a trapdoor or a hatch of some sort. I'm not usually a curious guy, but something about this made me forget my usual caution. I grabbed a crowbar from a nearby shelf, wedged it under the wood, and pried it up. A foul smell hit my face. It reminded me of wet earth and mold. I saw a gap beneath the panel. I shone my flashlight inside and realized there was a passageway. The walls inside looked like stone. The space was cramped, but it looked like it went deeper. Under the building, I felt a chill run through me. In my head, I argued with myself. I had no obligation to explore that passage. I was just a plumber hired to fix leaks, but I felt drawn to it. Furthermore, I told myself I had to check if there were any old pipes down there causing the moisture problem. Furthermore, I pulled out my phone to see if I had a signal. Nothing. I tried the flashlight again, making it sure the batteries were fresh. Then I lowered myself onto the ledge and jumped down. The air was stale and thick. The passage was barely wide enough for me to move without brushing the walls. My boots slipped a bit on the damp ground. Stones jutted out at odd angles, and I bumped my shoulders as I inched forward. The passage sloped down. The flashlight beam illuminated a rough path ahead. Old bits of wood and debris crunched under my feet. My heart was pounding and my ears felt hot. I was uneasy, but I kept going. After maybe 10 steps, I reached a larger space. The ceiling rose, and the curd walls opened up into something like a small chamber. I saw old bricks stacked around the edges, as if someone had tried to seal off parts of the area. I also saw metal pipes overhead. They connected to the building's foundation, but they branched off into these older tunnels. It was hard to tell what everything was for. I moved the light around slowly. Trying to get a full picture, I spotted an opening on the opposite side of the chamber. The darkness in that tunnel was intense. I felt a breeze coming from it, which meant there was a source of air somewhere. That's when I heard the voice again. Gary. It sounded soft, but this time it seemed to echo around the chamber. I felt my hands shake. I swallowed hard, trying to calm myself. There was nobody there. I aimed my flashlight in all directions, calling out, "Who's down here?" My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. I took a step forward, shining the light into the next tunnel. The voice spoke again, "Come this way." It felt like it was right in my ear, but I still saw nobody. I started to doubt my sanity. I wondered if maybe I was breathing in fumes or mold spores that made me hear things. But the voice was too clear. It was definitely a human voice. I thought about going back, but I was already in too deep. My curiosity took over. I wanted to figure out what it was happening. I felt a mix of dread and excitement. My stomach twisted, but I stepped into the next tunnel. The walls here were narrower. The air felt colder. My flashlight caught glimpses of strange markings etched into the stone. They looked like small crosses and random letters, carved in a messy way. I felt my pulse race. My knees felt weak, but I kept walking. The tunnel curved, and I had to duck to avoid hitting my head on the low ceiling. After a few more steps, I reached another chamber. This one was bigger, maybe the size of a small room. There were old wooden planks on the ground, and some broken tools that looked ancient. Rust covered everything. I spotted a few thick pipes crossing overhead. They rattled a bit, releasing droplets that fell onto my jacket. I heard a hiss, then a gurgling sound, like water flowing through them. My flashlight flickered. The batteries were new, but the light dimmed for a second, then came back. I felt a surge of panic. I had a spare flashlight in my bag, but it was back in the basement room. I cursed under my breath, hoping my main flashlight would last. I heard the voice again. It was a whisper now, speaking my name over and over. Gary. Gary. It felt like it was circling the chamber. Bouncing from wall to wall, I turned in a slow circle trying to pinpoint the source. My footsteps crunched on the loose debris. I looked at the ground and noticed something. Metal sticking out of the dirt. I knelt down and brushed some of the dirt away, revealing a small rusted plaque. It had letters on it, but they were too worn to read clearly. Then I heard a scraping sound behind me. I jumped up and spun around, aiming the flashlight. I saw a faint shape move along the far wall, but the shape vanished as soon as the light hit it. My breathing became shaky. My palms were slick with sweat. The voice was gone. The place went silent, except for the drip of water and my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I looked around for any sign of a living person, but found none. I moved the flashlight over the walls. That's when I saw something that made my skin crawl. There were older pipes leading into a sealed section of the wall. The bricks looked newer than the rest of the chamber. They were stacked in a rough patchwork, like someone had quickly sealed an opening. I walked over to it, put my ear against the bricks, and listened. At first I only heard my own breath. Then I heard a faint sound like a deep sigh. It came from behind the bricks. My mind raced. I thought maybe there was a hidden room behind that wall. But the manager never mentioned any of this. I wondered if he even knew. Furthermore, I decided I had to see what was behind it. I felt an urgency to uncover whatever secrets lay there. My gut twisted and my head felt light, but I started crying at the bricks with the edge of my flashlight, trying to loosen them. It was slow work, and the bricks were heavy. I managed to dislodge one or two. Dust filled the air, making me cough. My heart pounded, even harder. After removing a few bricks, I could see a gap inside. I aimed my flashlight through the hole. On the other side, there was another chamber, smaller, with a low ceiling. The flashlight revealed metal rings in the walls. They looked like anchors for chains. There was a small wooden stool in the corner, rotted with age. A coil of chain lay on the floor, rusted and tangled. My blood ran cold. The place felt disturbing, like something awful. It happened once there. I stepped back, feeling the breath catch in my throat. The voice returned, closer than ever. It said, "They did terrible things here, Gary." My flashlight flickered again, then stabilized. I felt a knot in my chest. I didn't want to stay any longer. Furthermore, I backed away from the wall, keeping my eyes on that hole. My pulse hammered in my temples. The air felt heavier. My knees shook. I turned and hurried back the way I came, through the narrow tunnel, past the strange carvings, back to the first chamber. My flashlight beam jittered on the walls as my hand trembled. I stumbled on loose stones but kept going. I heard faint whispers behind me, as if they followed me. The voice repeated my name, but I refused to look back. My only goal, I had to get out of there. My breathing was ragged and my legs ached from the awkwardness. Crouch I had to maintain. When I reached the chamber with the wooden hatch, I scrambled up and grabbed the edge of the open floor panel. I pulled myself back into the basement's maintenance room and slammed the panel shut. My hands fumbled as I tried to fit the hatch back into place. I didn't care if it was perfect. I just wanted to seal it. Furthermore, I stood there, panting, staring at them. Closed panel. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My mind raced with questions, but I had no answers. I looked at my watch and saw that I'd been down there for almost an hour, though it felt longer. I gathered my tools with shaky hands. Furthermore, I wiped the sweat off my face. My breath still came in. Quick bursts. I didn't want to stay in that basement for another second. I turned it off. Main valve again, grabbed my stuff, and made my way up the stairs. My mind replayed the sight of that sealed chamber and the chains on the walls. When I reached the lobby, the manager was nowhere to be seen. I left a note on the reception desk. I explained that I fixed the leaky pipe, but recommended an inspection of the basement's structure. I didn't mention the hidden tunnels. Furthermore, I didn't mention the voice. Furthermore, I figured nobody would believe me and I didn't want to return to that place. I just wanted to leave. As soon as I stepped outside, I felt the cool air hit me. Sweaty skin. My nerves were shot and my stomach churned. I walked to my van, threw my tools in the back, and sat behind the wheel. I locked the doors, even though it was broad daylight. Furthermore, I started the engine and took one last look at the building. The windows looked old and lifeless, like they hid secrets behind every curtain. Part of me wanted to forget everything I saw. Another part of me felt a sick curiosity about what else might be hidden underneath those floors. I drove away, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind raced with thoughts of the voice calling my name, the strange bricks in the hidden room. I kept hearing those whispers in my head. For days afterward, I had nightmares about narrow tunnels and distant echoes. Sometimes I woke up in a cold sweat, convinced I still heard someone whispering, "Gary," in the darkness. I never returned to that building. I told my supervisor I wasn't comfortable doing any more jobs there. He didn't ask why, he just assigned me somewhere else. I don't know if the manager ever called another plumber to investigate the basement further. Part of me hopes they sealed everything up. Another part of me doubts it will ever truly stay hidden. I suspect those tunnels existed long before the current owners had any idea what lay beneath. And the voice in those tunnels? I can't explain it. I only know it was real enough to terrify me. That's my story. I saw things in those tunnels that made my skin crawl, and I heard a voice that knew my name before I even realized I wasn't alone. I'm still not sure if I was dealing with something supernatural or if it was just the echo of some dark events from the past. I do know that I won't ever go looking for answers down there again. I fixed the leak. That was my job, but I learned that not all problems in a building are about pipes and valves. Sometimes the walls and floors hide secrets better left alone. If anyone else wants to dig deeper, they can. I don't need to hear that voice again. Furthermore, I still remember the moment I stepped off the bus. The air felt thicker than usual, and my shirt clung to my back. I was in this old colonial town because I wanted a change of scenery, nothing more. I wasn't prepared for the strange events that would unfold once I checked into that ancient hotel. Right from the start, something about that place made my stomach tighten. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the sensation felt like a knot under my ribs. I ignored it at first because I needed a place to stay, and the Hotel Colonial was the only option that fits my budget. Now I realize I should have paid more attention to my instincts. I arrived late in the afternoon. The sun was low, and its light stretched across the cobblestone streets. The town looked picturesque in that golden light, but the buildings were long shadows. The hotel stood on a corner with large wooden doors and tall windows with iron bars. The facade had faded paint and small cracks running across the walls. When I pushed open the heavy door, the hinges groaned. A single overhead light illuminated the lobby, revealing worn rugs and a wooden check-in desk. A ceiling fan spins slowly above. A set of leather chairs. I noticed the musty smell right away, like old wood mixed with a bit of mildew. The manager greeted me with a polite nod. He was a tall, thin man, sunken cheeks and short gray hair. He wore a vest that looked a bit too big for him. His voice was soft, but it echoed around the empty space. I told him my name, and he checked my reservation in a leather-bound ledger. There was no computer in sight. He handed me a brass key with a tag that read, Room 14. Then he told me the room was on the second floor at the end of the hallway. I took the narrow staircase. The steps creaked under my feet, and the railing wobbled a little whenever I put any weight on it. The walls on the staircase were lined with old portraits of stern-looking men and women. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I climbed. When I reached the second floor, I turned left and walked to the very end of the hallway. The corridor smelled stale, and a single light bulb flickered overhead. The doors all had brass numbers nailed to them. Mine was the last one on the right. The key jammed a bit in the lock, so I had to wiggle it. I pushed open the door and flipped the light switch. A single overhead lamp lit the room. The furniture was old. There was a wooden dresser with peeling varnish, a small desk near the window, and a bed with a tall headboard carved with floral designs. The air inside felt stiff, and my first thought was to open a window, but the shutters seemed stuck. I tugged on them, and they finally gave way with a scraping sound. A slight breeze entered, carrying the scent of dust and distant cooking fires from the street below. I dropped my bag and sat on the bed. The mattress felt firm, and the sheets looked clean but well worn. My body felt tired from the bus ride, so I decided to freshen up. The bathroom door was right next to the dresser. Inside, the sink had a stained porcelain bowl and the faucet squeaked. When I turned it on, the water ran cold and clear. I splashed some on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked bloodshot, and I felt a mild headache forming at my temples. I wiped my face, then walked back into the room. I noticed the walls had patches of discoloration near the corners. The wooden floor creaked with every step. Night came faster than I expected. I had a quick dinner at a small cafe across the street, then returned to my room. The hallway lights were dim, and I heard soft music echoing from the lobby. There was no one else around. Back inside, I shut the door and flicked on the overhead lamp. As I changed into more comfortable clothes, I thought I heard a faint shuffling sound coming from behind the walls. It reminded me of something dragging or sliding, but it was too faint to identify clearly. I paused and listened. The sound stopped. I shrugged it off and told myself it was probably an old pipe or some rodent in the walls. I turned out the light and lay on the bed. The sheets felt a bit cold. My eyes struggled to adjust to the darkness because there was only a small sliver of moonlight came through the open shutters. I was about to drift off when I heard the floor creak near the door. My body tensed, and I sat up. My heart pounded, and I felt a rush of heat spread through my chest. I stared at the spot where I thought the sound came from, but I couldn't see anything. The darkness made everything look flat and lifeless. Then I heard what sounded like a whisper. It was soft, like a breath, not a clear voice. I couldn't pick out words or any real meaning. It just sounded like someone exhaling close to my ear. I jumped out of bed, flipped the light back on, and scanned the room. Nothing looked out of place. The door was still shut. The window was open, but there was nobody outside. My ears started ringing a bit, and I realized I was breathing heavily. I forced myself to calm down and check the bathroom. It was empty. I even looked behind. The curtains. Nothing. Finally, I told myself I was just jumpy because the hotel was old and unfamiliar. I turned the light off again and tried to sleep. My dreams were restless, filled with strange shapes I couldn't identify. I kept waking up sweating and uneasy. At one point, I felt like someone was watching me from the corner of the room, but whenever I sat up, I only saw the same worn furniture. The next morning, I woke up later than I planned. The sun was shining through the shutters and my body felt sore like I hadn't slept properly. I took a quick shower, got dressed, and went downstairs for breakfast. The dining area was a small room next to the lobby. It had a few tables and simple chairs. I sat down and a woman brought me coffee and a plate with bread and fruit. She didn't speak much, and she moved quietly around the tables. I looked around for other guests, but there were only empty tables. The manager wasn't there. I finished my meal and decided to explore the town. During the day, the streets were bustling with tourists and locals. People sold handmade crafts, and there were small museums showcasing local history. I visited a couple of them. One described the colonial period, showed old photographs of the same streets I was walking on. I noticed this black and white photo of the Hotel Colonial. It looked almost the same except for the sign above, the door that's no longer there. I read a small plaque under the photo. It mentioned that the hotel was once owned by a wealthy family that had left under mysterious circumstances. It didn't mention deaths or anything like that, but it implied there was an unresolved problem that made the family left. I felt a mild chill when I realized my room might have been part of that history. I spent most of the afternoon wandering around, eating local snacks and checking out them architectural sites. By sunset, my feet were tired and my head felt clouded from the heat. I returned to the hotel, hoping for a better night's sleep. The hallway was empty again, and I noticed that same stale smell. My footsteps echoed against the old floorboards, and I felt a slight pressure in my chest when I reached my door. I found that the shutters were open again, even though I remembered closing them before I left. I looked around to see if housekeeping had come in, but nothing else seemed touched. The bed was still unmade, and my bag was in the same spot. I pulled the shutters shut again and locked them. Then I went to clean up in the bathroom. While I was washing my face, I heard a small scrape on the room's floor. I froze, my hands still wet. I shut it off, faucet, and listened. The sound was brief, like a chair being moved slightly across the wood. Boards. I dried my face on a towel and stepped out of the bathroom. The chair at the small desk was turned slightly away from the desk, like someone had shifted it. I knew I'd left it tucked in. My throat felt tight, and my palms started sweating. I approached the chair. I didn't see anything on it, under it, or around it. I slid it back in place and tried to shake off the nervousness feeling. Night fell again. This time I felt determined to sleep, but also on edge. A single lamp lit as I lay in bed, flipping through some local brochures I grabbed. The words blurred on the page because I couldn't concentrate. The silence weighed on me. It almost is. Felt too quiet, like the entire building was holding its breath. I turned off the lamp, 11, and tried to rest. Sometime after midnight, I jolted awake. A cold draft blew across my arms, making the hairs on my skin stand up. I noticed the shutters were open again. My heart pounded, and my mind raced with explanations. Maybe the lock was broken, or maybe I hadn't locked them properly. The curtains billowed slightly, and the moonlight lit part of the floor. I saw a faint outline near the desk, like a vertical shape that seemed darker than the rest of the room. It moved slightly, then vanished as my eyes focused. I sat up so fast I felt a cramp in my side. My chest felt tight, and my breathing was shallow. I flicked on the lamp and scanned the room. There was no one there. The door was still locked from the inside. I got up and went to the window. I yanked till the shutters closed again and tested the latch several times. It seemed to catch, but I still felt uneasy. My hands shook a little as I backed away from the window. I could feel my heart beating in my neck. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down. Furthermore, I slept a lot after that. I sat in bed with the lamp on, listening for every small noise. Around 3 in the morning, I heard whispers. This time they seemed to come from near the dresser. They were low, like 2 or 3 voices speaking at once, but I couldn't make out any words. My scalp tingled and a wave of goosebumps ran down my arms. I tried to muster the courage to check the dresser. When I finally stood up, the whispers stopped. I stepped closer, opened the drawers, and looked inside. Nothing. I ran my hand along the back of the dresser. The wood felt rough and slightly damp. I heard a soft tap behind it, like something shifting. My chest felt tight again, and I felt an urgent need to back away. At dawn, I finally got a short burst of sleep. The morning light came through the gaps in the shutters, and I woke up groggy and anxious. I decided to talk to the manager. Maybe he had some explanation for the strange things happening in room 14. I went downstairs and found him at the desk. He looked up and greeted me with a polite nod. I asked him if there had been any repairs done in my room, or if housekeeping had been entering when I was out. He tilted his head and said they hadn't assigned any staff to my room, yet because I hadn't requested full service. Then he looked away, like he was choosing his words carefully. He told me the hotel had a long history. He mentioned stories of strange sights and sounds, especially in certain parts of the building. He admitted some guests reported hearing whispers at night. He didn't seem surprised by my experience. That made me uneasy. I asked him if there was any record of what had happened in the past. He shrugged and said some old documents might exist in the back office, but they weren't available to the public. His manner was polite, but he seemed to want to change the subject. I spent the rest of the day in town, but I couldn't enjoy myself. My mind was stuck on what I'd heard and seen. By late afternoon, I decided to check out a local archives building. The clerk there allowed me to look through the old newspapers. I found a mention of the hotel's original owner. It said he had left abruptly and never returned. It also said something about a missing heirloom. The articles hinted that the property might have been sold under unusual circumstances. There were no details on what exactly happened, just vague references to disputes and unresolved conflicts. Nobody was reported dead, but it sounded messy. I returned to the hotel that evening, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. The hallway was quiet again, and the same flickering bulb cast a weak light glow on the old wallpaper. When I reached my room, I hesitated before unlocking the door. My hands shook a little. I stepped inside, flipped on the light, and braced myself for something odd. The shutters were closed. The bed was as I'd left it, and the chair was in its normal position, but the air felt colder than before. It reminded me of standing near a drafty building. Window on a cold night, except the weather outside was warm. I started to investigate the room more thoroughly. I pushed the dresser away from the wall. The wood scraped against the floor and dust filled the air. My throat felt scratchy and my eyes watered. Behind the dresser there was a narrow gap in the wall, like a small recess. Inside I found an old piece of fabric bunched up. It looked like part of a cloth bag, or maybe a pouch. I reached in and grabbed it. It felt brittle, and a small cloud of dust flew off. It had some sort of embroidered pattern. I couldn't see any items inside. It was empty. I placed it on the bed and tried to smooth it out. The edges were frayed, and the embroidery looked like initials, but they were faded. It could have been the family's monogram. My stomach felt twisted and my hands felt clammy. Something about this pouch felt connected to the whispers. I didn't know how or why, but I felt certain. I stuffed it in my backpack, feeling a shiver across my shoulders. Then I pushed the dresser back against the wall. That night I waited in the room with the lamp on. Around midnight I heard the familiar whispers. This time they sounded closer, like they were just behind the headboard. I clutched the embroidered pouch. A sudden idea popped into my mind. Maybe these voices were wanted. The missing item back. I didn't know if that was true, but I was desperate. I got up, placed them, pouch on the desk, and speak out loud. My voice cracked. I said something like, "Is this what you're looking for?" I felt foolish, but I kept going. The whispers stopped. The hairs. My arms stood up and I felt a chill on the back of my neck. I waited, heart pounding. A moment later, the air felt lighter. The cold draft lifted. It was like the tension in the room eased up. I stayed awake for another hour, listening. The whispers didn't return. I eventually fell asleep with the lamp still on. The next morning, I woke up feeling more rested than I had days. I half expected to see the shutters open again, but they were still locked. Embroidered pouch sat on the desk, untouched. I decided to leave it on the dresser as I left for breakfast. In the dining area, I ate quickly and kept to myself. I didn't mention the pouch or the whispers to anyone. When I returned to my room, everything felt still. The air was normal. The cold draft was gone, and there were no signs of any tampering. I grabbed my bag, took one last. I looked at that old embroidered pouch and decided to leave it where I found it, inside that gap, behind the dresser. I nudged the dresser back into place, making sure it was lined up with the wall. Then I locked the shutters and double-checked the latch. That night there were no whispers, no shifting chairs, and no strange shapes. I slept with the lamp off. The relief felt almost overwhelming. The next day I packed my things, checked out, and headed to my next destination. I didn't get all the answers about the hotel's history, but I sensed that the pouch belonged there. Maybe I put it back where it was meant to be, or maybe I just convinced myself I had. Either way, the haunting presence in that room seemed satisfied, and I left that old hotel with the feeling that I'd resolved something. Even now, when I think about the Hotel Colonial, I feel that twinge of fear in my chest, but I also remember that cold draft lifting, and the way the whispers suddenly stopped. I can't explain any of it, but I know it was real. If anyone ever asks me about the strangest place I've stayed, I always mention room 14 at the Hotel Colonial. I describe the soft whispers, the chilling draft, and the uneasy nights. I also mention how, in the end, I found that old, embroidered pouch behind the dresser. I don't claim to know what it all meant, but I'll never forget how it felt. And that's all there is to it. There's a pool in Pickerel Park. My entire life changed in high school. Some people got a deeper voice, a few inches, and a scholarship to an impressive college. I got a broken home. My last year at Rhythm Heights, for a long time, was something that needed to be relegated behind the doors of a therapist's office rather than a yearbook to look back on. Until I went to Pickerel Park. Everyone is going after midnight tonight. You in? Dylan asked. You know parks are open during the day, I said as I closed the steel door of my locker, half paying attention to him. The rest of my focus dedicated to a calc finale I was woefully unprepared for. Dylan rolled his eyes and elbowed me. Dude, 2 words. Amber Rodhouse. He then pantomimed an hourglass figure as if that meant something. The girl who has wanted nothing to do with you since junior year. The very same. He wrapped an arm around me, until I slipped her some beautiful poetry straight from the heart that made her swoon. That's an odd way to say thank you, Scott, for making me sound less like a creep. What I had before was from my very core. 10 mentions about how great she looks from behind. People don't immediately think of where you sit in Spanish class, dude. Anyway, he coughed to move on. We'd been texting since last Saturday and really hit off. Your wingman ship and my silver tongue secured us an invite to a sick-ass party. I raised an eyebrow at that. At a park. At midnight. A haunted park at midnight, Scotty. I hated it when he called me Scotty. It's the one where that Clemens kid went missing. I parked myself at the door of Mr. O'Reilly's calculus class. And you think that lovely background is going to get you an award-winning handjob from Amber. Dylan whistled. The scar on his bottom lip, the one he got back in the 3rd grade from running headfirst into a flagpole, winked at me with the same lack of subtlety as his eyes. Given what he was saying, he was still the spitting image of that kid who loved to run Machess 3 into a broken face. I am appalled at your crass assumption of such a lady. I am a gentleman, Scotsman. I aim only for second base during a first meeting of lips, he said, marching toward our seats in the back of the class. I sat down and unpacked my things. As I prepared to carve off another chunk of my GPA, Dylan leaned over to me, whispering to avoid Mr. O'Reilly's Oscar-worthy-ass chewings. Before you cop an excuse, you're going. I need a homie there, and we both know you need this. I shot him a glare. It was all Dylan needed to kill that line of thought. He put his hands up in a defensive stance, expecting me to box him. All right, but you know I got a point. I didn't know that. At the time I was convinced of everything but. Dylan had spent too much energy convincing me of what I needed lately. The only thing I knew for certain was my best friend was becoming a real pain in the ass, even if a well-intended one. And yet, I found myself ready at 11 that night, zipping up my hoodie and making my way towards a party that, at best, got my best friend laid. I didn't even want to consider the worst case. Some things are better left as surprises. What was no surprise was where I found Dad lying that night. His usual spot, half dozing on the dining room table. A bottle of cheap scotch drained dry. If he was on schedule, he'd been there since work and hadn't eaten anything. The thought dawned on me as I threw the couch throw over him. Most people on their way to this party had to forge cover-up stories to make it, and all I had to do was cover up my dad, just in the hopes he wouldn't freeze after he crashed onto the tile floor mid-stupor. Before I left, I put a glass of water on the table, tossed the meatloaf I made yesterday into the microwave, picked up a Sharpie, and wrote instructions on his limp arm. Went out. Dinner and Mike Wolf. I cringed as I ran out of room. Then the buried part of me spoke out. I meant to think it, but spoke it as I loomed over him. Fuck it, you'll figure it out. Night, Dad, I said after a moment of guilt. I patted him on the back and was on my way. Dylan and I got there about 20 minutes late, his idea. He insisted show times were for suckers. As we rolled up to Pickerel Park, killing tears for fears as they demanded we abandon Mother Nature, I thought Dylan might have underestimated how seriously other people might take a rule like his. The scene was dead. There were maybe 15 people, all clustered around a couple of barrel fires like a homeless encampment. The rest of the place didn't fare much better. The park was a scab of West Texas dirt, itching the skin of some emaciated pine woods, one cigarette away from a Burning Man impression, and yet the offbeat reggae blaring out of some crappy bass-heavy Bluetooth speaker was the worst part. I looked at Dylan. Looks like we are early, he said. Dude. Okay, but the real party is at the lake in the back. There are probably more people there. Lake. You said it was a pool. Dylan shrugged. Just what it's called, man. You know, Camelot and shit. Right. The famous story of King Arthur and the Lady of the Pool. Dylan opened the door. Never heard it. Too busy listening to the dillweed in the Subaru Outback. Would you just get out of the car? We sauntered up, and in moments, Dylan locked onto his goal. Miss Rodhouse, I presume? He said, shouting from afar. Once we made it to Amber's little huddle, he leaned over the beer keg in the center and proffered his hand so he that might kiss hers. Riley, Amber's best friend, grimaced in disgust, an appropriate reaction. The other three dudes I didn't know exchanged bemused glances. Amber, though, wore an ear-to-ear grin wider than I had ever seen. "Oh, darling," she said, flicking her dusky blonde hair over her shoulder and twirling some imaginary pearls. "Long how I've awaited your arrival. Exquisitely, I'm sure, madame." As Dylan went on with his horrid pageantry, I wandered over to the side of the group to get some distance. I could almost hear my internal Geiger counter for cringe quieting as I did. The tallest of the gaggle, a guy with an X-Men Letterman jacket strapped tight over an athletic build, stuck a hand out to me as I approached. "Sup, man? I'm Thomas. That's Dean and Rick." Dean was a short and stocky guy with a stapled-on smile, clearly blazed out of his mind. Rick was a spectacled fellow with straight, slick-back hair, a short-sleeved button-up, and astute eyes. I'm pretty sure he was our school's photographer, or maybe a pre-bite Peter Parker. They both threw me some nods, and I gave them my name in exchange. "You want a beer?" Thomas asked, offering me a red Solo cup. "I'm good. Not a fan, honestly. Someone had to be sober in my family." Part of my brain lingered on Dad for a moment, wondering if he made it into his bed tonight, or if he was drooling, or puking, all over the kitchen tile. "You smoke?" Dean wheezed out, confirming my assessment of him. I declined again, killing all conversation. 2 swift strokes, and I had become the DARE counselor. Before we could all sit around in silence like a group of husbands abandoned by our wives at a BBQ, Riley chimed in with a look of utter disgust still on her face. At least I believe it was disgust. She was hard to discern in the dark. She wore all black and had midnight pitch hair. Her skin was a dusky olive color and melded with the shadows seamlessly. Had it not been for her emerald eyes, I would have lost her in the night. They were cute for 10 seconds, but now I am gonna be sick. She gestured to Dylan and Amber, who didn't seem halfway done with their horrid play. "I think it's funny," Rick said. "That's because you are a theater nerd," Dean said, passing his joint to Riley, who took a drag with such familiarity, it was like she asked him to roll it for her. "Y'all got no chill," Thomas laughed. "I don't think I can watch that anymore," I said. "Why don't we go check out this pool?" "Great idea," Dylan shouted, bursting into the group, hooking Riley and I into her pits. "Shall I lead the way to our doom?" he said, fingers wiggling. Only Dean and Amber laughed. Both of them were delirious in their own way, I suppose. As I trailed the cluster, a lead weight dropped into my stomach. Not an uncommon phenomenon that year. Each passing day, the weight lessened, or I got more used to it, but now and again it would hit. My legs would turn to fresh forged iron. Heavy and fragile, flimsy and scathing. To move was to suffer. So much of me wanted to crash into the dirt, but like always, I put it on the shelf of my mind and marched on, even when it was difficult enough to hurt. There was too much to do, and too many people who would see. Except that didn't solve it like before. The weight persisted. A bad smell in the air. A corpse was unearthed. Something real, tangible, foul. I scanned the tree line, convinced something was in wait, watching. Each snap of a twig and rustle of leaves pinged around my head as if it were happening right in the canals of my skull. Then I saw it. A blob of shadow, innocuous save for its isolation atop a branch, silhouetted by the crooked moon behind. At first it was just a massive shadow I had convinced myself I was characterizing. Laundry in the corner of a dark room that morphs into a serial killer. But right as I started to turn, two beads of piercing yellow opened from the center of the shadow, trained right on me. Then, as if a stray piece of wind kidnapped some long-forgotten syllable, a hoarse sound funneled into my ears. "You... what?" I said. "How are you feeling?" "Jesus," I yelped, muffling it into a whisper as the word burst from my lips. I turned to see Riley, recoiled in shock. "Sorry," she chuckled. I snapped my head back to the tree. No eyes, and as if in response to my fears, the wind brushed it. The confusing mass that had glared at me rustled into individual leaves. It was only a tree branch. But that voice? I let out a sigh. "No, I'm sorry. I think I am seeing things." "I bet. You are probably stressed out of your mind." "What you mean?" Then there was a pause. A hesitation only those with pity to spare wear. Ahead, Dylan was locked in arms with Amber. Chatting, joking. He looked at her and no one else. But I knew the side of his eye was on me. I should have known better. He had told Amber, who had told Riley. And now I was the Make-A-Wish kid who didn't know they had cancer. "Right," I said, the image of what had terrified me moments ago, overtaken by a budding resentment. "I'm sorry." "It's fine, Riley. Really. It doesn't have to be," she whispered. She was kind. I knew it then, and I know it now. But it was warm like a sauna I had been locked into. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask how many days the living must endure the condolences for the dead. How long do I have to hear how hard I must have it, and how bad other people feel for me? I wanted to look her square in the face and say, "When does my face pull back the panhandle and stop collecting bullshit tips on how to move on?" But I didn't. I put it on the shelf. It creaked in complaints, pushed to capacity by another bottled burden. It wouldn't buckle tonight, so I said thank you. "I wasn't trying to bring it up, Scott. I understand what you were going..." "Whoa, Amber said. "Check it out, guys." I was so preoccupied I hadn't noticed. We had made it to the lake. Pickerel Pool was a sheer piece of glass in the weak moonlight, undisturbed. Not even a skitterbug ran across its surface, and the wildlife seemed to be under the same obligation. No wind, call, or howl pierced the stillness of the air or water. It was as if the lake was a crystal lid to a terrarium we had unknowingly been placed in. "Damn, shit's dope," Dean said through a skunk-scented cloud of smoke. "Told you, dude," Dylan whispered. "Camelot." I shot him a confused look. Thomas walked forward to the lake's edge. "Check it out." It was a small memorial, a cylindrical cedar post, painted white and adorned with fresh flowers, Pokemon drawings, and images of superheroes. At its base sat a little xylophone, tiny enough for a 5-year-old to play. A memorial much like those you'd see on the side of the road for folks who lost their lives in car accidents. But the middle stood out. Enshrined around the midsection of the post was a tattered cape, cloaking a gold plaque. I read it aloud. "In loving memory of Isaac Clemens, whose hugs, kisses, and laughs saved our day, every day. Our loss is heaven's gain. Miss you, bud." The words fell out of my mouth like stones. We sat in silence. No one moved, afraid to disturb the tension as unbroken as the lake. With each passing second, the reality of our situation worsened. We all thought the same thing. 7 loser kids, ready to get trashed and literally dance atop a kid's grave. motivated by shit beer and second base. It made me sick. Then Dylan walked up to Isaac's memorial, knelt, and placed his hand on the top of the post. Dude, for it is an awesome Pokemon. When I played, I thought Sandslash kicked ass. Sorry, I thought he rocked. I used him even though he sucked. And is that a blue beetle drawing? My man. We all just watched as Dylan carried on a conversation with no one. If it were anyone else, it would be a joke, a mockery, but not the way Dylan talked. You'd swear he was a divining rod who had contacted the spirit world with the way he spoke to the grave. You seem like a great guy, Isaac. Just going by what your parents wrote. He held the corner of his cape between two fingers. A real hero. He looked back at me for a moment. Though he said nothing, his eyes spoke volumes, filled with the words I had rebuked over and over again. I gave him a nod that I hoped showed my appreciation. He returned it with a smile like always, and turned back to the memorial. So, save our night. A lot of us could use a pick-me-up. He stood up and placed his hand on the top of the post, like he was ruffling the kid's hair. It was honestly too much, but if you knew Dylan, you'd know he wasn't saying that to impress a girl or to get laid. The real deal. That was so sweet, Amber said, hands clasped at her chest. Maybe his chances weren't shot after all. Yeah, bro. That was poetic as hell, Thomas said, helping Dean set up the keg. It must have worked, too. The mood picked up. Thomas busted out a good speaker and started to play some acoustic country. Dean made sure everyone was tipsy. We all settled into various parts of the lake to have a good time. Amber and Dylan were deep in the pool, playing a flirtatious game of Marco Polo. Amber's giggles constantly exposed her position, but they didn't mind. Rick took photos of the moon. Dean and Thomas chucked a football back and forth, and Riley mingled all around the water's edge, dancing by herself. And there I was, sitting by Isaac's memorial. I wasn't sad or miserable for him. I related to him. A sheer unfairness felt across the barriers of death and life. I winced in pain. I had twisted the denim of my jeans into tight spirals in my fist. My knuckles had gone bleached white, and they had cut through the core of my palm. How is it that the heart is one of the strongest muscles in the body, yet so feeble that when we lose those we love, it fails twice? The physical loss is their absence. The destruction of routine, of joy, of anger and annoyance. A robbery of our lives by vandals we trusted. The days after are the worst. Those break you. They broke my father. When my mom died, it was as if someone chucked a window through my glass house, and there was no repairman in town. My only solace was that, each day that passed, I got to wander past the fractured pain with the hope that I'd eventually have some nostalgia to muse over it. What a bitter fucking joke. My dad died when I was 10, Riley said, sitting down, glazed in a light sheen of sweat from her dance, looking to Dylan and Amber in the middle of the lake. But not truly. She was elsewhere, wrapped in the arms of a man who'd been dead for almost a decade. Even with dilated, stoned eyes, red tinted from tears and drugs, she was quite beautiful. He was my whole world, still is. He loved doing things with me, would cook, clean, stuff like that. It's so weird. I never thought I would miss doing chores. I didn't want to face her. I felt like I was intruding on some pure moment. A crinkle of her nose, a stifled tear, the unblinking way in which she watched the water, all of it was hers. If I spoke, I would be acid-curdling the cream. But he made it, like, silly, you know? He'd make a flashlight have a voice, add sound effects to things. She put a finger up to her nose to mimic a mustache and deepened her voice. This only works if you make the noise first. Boop. She laughed, a deep croak which seemed rude not to join. After a quiet time, I found myself talking. How did he die? Just did in his sleep. Aneurysm. Yeah. She made small swirls in the dirt with her thumb. I don't pity you, Scott. Even at 10, each shitty condolence was like a hand pushing down on me. They all tried to pull me out of the water, save me from drowning, but each attempt just sunk me deeper. She skipped a stone. It fell through the surface as though it were made of air, hardly a ripple. I ain't going to sit here and lie that you will feel better one day. Haven't, not totally, but there are ways to keep going. She put a hand on mine, and before it could be something more, Dylan shouted over, "Scotsman, make a move, or get in the water." Our hands snapped away. A beet red flush overtook both of us. "You are the worst," Amber said, splashing a torrent of water towards Dylan. "You want to take turns dunking him," Thomas said, suddenly at our side, removing his jacket and shirt. Nothing would make me happier, I said. Riley cracked her knuckles in agreement. After about 10 minutes of waterboarding Dylan, we were all deep in the lake. I never wanted to leave. The moment the water kissed my abdomen, a rich warmth spread through my bones, a cradle of nature. Each ripple of movement was a departed embrace. My lungs were clear. My nose, which usually sported a congested passage, was free and filled with the scent of fresh ozone of a coming rain, but the sky was clear and peppered with stars. "That's the spirit, Scotty," Rick said, his demure disposition abandoned in favor of a glazed-out backstroke that glided before me like a wayward duck. I was confused for a moment, but then I touched the upturn of my cheeks. I hadn't noticed. I had a smile on my face. Looking around, we all did. And how long had we been idle here? Hadn't we been playing Marco Polo? Now, we were each meandering in our own waters, content with nothing but the light of the moon, the dead air, and the warm water to swaddle us. Rick was the first to go. No one saw it. It stood atop him, weightless, using him like Carrion's boat down the river Styx. A frail figure with messy hair, sheen gray skin, and a coat of white fur draped around its shoulders and back. Its arms were thin, twig-like, falling down to sharp, straight claws. Its face had no mouth, and 2 light beams of yellow instead of eyes. It looked down at the Rick, fascinated and analytical. It turned its head and narrowed its beamless eyes. Rick didn't see it and didn't feel it. His eyes closed, lost amidst the same bliss which had ensnared me. I felt feverish, a lost actor in a dream I was half in. I couldn't speak and didn't want to. So at peace, the sight before me wasn't horrifying, but rather too precious to disturb. Fear hadn't paralyzed me. Joy had hurt. Its voice was the dry gasp I had heard before. What? Rick said, suddenly snapping away from his piece. His expression flipped like a coin, and it disgusted me to see it. He sneered his face into a tight curve. His mouth carved out a snarl, and he flailed, intent on striking the monster. "Get the fuck off me, you absolute freak. I hate you. I hate everything you fucking are. You sad, pathetic waste of a goddamn population point." The figure raised its arms, pointed its needle fingers towards Rick's face, and did it with the slowness of someone half interested. Then they shot forward, pierced Rick's eyes, and exited out his skull, killing the words in his mouth. Hurt. Then Rick sank. The water swallowed him without effort, falling beneath the tension without acknowledgement, just like the stone Riley had skipped before. The monster went with him, sinking as the captain aboard a capsized vessel. When all the strands on his head were beneath the glass pool, I wasn't able to break my gaze. Looking around the lake, not a single one of them noticed. They were all preoccupied with their serenity. Riley swam in a small circle. Dylan and Amber were sucking on each other's faces. Thomas and Dean tossed a football back and forth. Not a single concerned soul. And on the outside, I wasn't either. My placid smile and dazed eyes were etched onto my face like I were stone. My heart rate must have been in the mid-60s. I even paddled a few lazy breaststrokes in a small circle. On the inside, I screamed. A faint resistance, an echo of horror from the well of my mind, a trapped line of thought, half buried in a numb vessel. Each movement was an action coated in molasses, both in control and not. I wanted to run. I wanted to stay. Then it emerged near Thomas and Dean, but it wasn't alone. Rick rose with it. His skin was opalescent, and his eyes the same feverish yellow, shining bright enough to leave small circles of illumination on Thomas' skin. He wore a smile woven not with maliciousness, but rich, full happiness. Hurt? The figure crawled atop Dean's stocky shoulders, like a spider. It pierced his eyes more slowly this time, moving its fingers around his sockets in a blending motion. After the 4th revolution of the needles blending his eyes, Dean's piece shattered. His hands snapped to his head, desperate to hold it together, and he bellowed the ugliest shriek I have ever heard. "Stop, please God. Stop. It'll be good. I swear, El." It was all he could manage before he sank into the pool. Not even a gargle from the water which filled his open mouth. Just a soundless plunge before erasure. Thomas blinked and was freed. Holy shit. Rick had already begun to crawl atop him, urging him deeper. "It's okay, man. It's okay. You'll see. It's all fine," Rick said, pulling on his clothes, his face and hair, each tug sinking them both lower and lower. Thomas landed haymaker after haymaker on Rick's face, desperate to free himself. He had almost 40 pounds on the guy, but from my angle it was like battling a statue. Red welts painted his knuckles, battered and bloodied. while Rick's face remained clean and blissful. They went down like that. Just before the water swallowed him, he looked to me and tried to scream, but the hands of Dean and Rick found purchase on his jaw, silencing him and pulling him beneath the surface. The hold over me was lighter now. Maybe the creature's bifurcated focus helped, or my internal resistance had pulled through. I wasn't sure, but the water had switched from cement to syrup, and I pulled on the fleeting thread of sanity. I had to flail to Amber and Dylan. Even as the veins in my face strained against my skin, a pressure as intense as defying Jupiter's gravity, I was still so damn happy for them. I cried tears of joy as I paddled like a drunk dog across the lake, urging my throat to scream, but unable to overcome the foreign cooing of happiness that bubbled in my throat. With each stroke, the gulf seemed harder and harder to cross. When I was halfway, Dean, Rick, and Thomas emerged, encircling the two lovebirds in locked hands, a ring of cultists to their love. The creature sprang from the water in a spiral tower of flesh. Its thin legs and torso coiled tightly, stretched till it dangled over Dylan and Amber like an angler fish lure. The gang pulled the two apart with conviction. Their focus was on Amber, not Dylan. Dylan opened his eyes wide after being ripped from Amber's lips. "Guys, what the hell?" he said. He was confused at first. Then he saw their eyes, and their smiles, and then the creature that swayed above him. He saw me, crazed, smiling. Panic finally showed on my face, breaking through the miasma of serenity, and he realized how dire the situation was. He didn't run, and he never was entranced. He saw the twisted display before him, and swam to them without hesitation, spearing his way towards Amber. As they lifted her to the creature above, he yanked, pried, and clawed at their hands. An act of frivolity that none of the participants seemed to notice. Certainly not Amber, hoisted atop all of them, backlit by the lagoon glow of the eyes beneath her, embraced the dangling horror with pure glee. She never broke free, never snapped, not even when it caged her skull with its needle grip and methodically pierced it with each finger. The squelch of her brain being skewered cued their descent back into the lake. "No!" Dylan screamed, crying, slamming his fists on Dean's back, whose headbeams were too enamored with Amber to mind the pitiful blows. Then all but the creature's head was gone. It floated amidst its wisping strands of soaked hair and stared at Dylan in analysis. Then the creature's mouthless visage opened on a jagged hinge. A thin line tore through its pallid flesh like an invisible knife. Its crooked lips turned upward, unveiling dozens of fangs. "Saved," it purred. With a plunk of a misskipped stone, it descended. "Scott, we should go." It was Riley. She was behind me, hushed. She tugged on my hand beneath the water. The moment her fingers graced mine, my trance shattered. I blinked, then flailed. I searched around the lake, my head snapping around. Nothing but the sheen surface, reflecting the dead sky and the glowering moon, and Dylan, who bobbed and floated in complete shock. "Dylan," I said, whispering as loudly as I could. I reached out to touch him. He floated back like a buoy, staring at where the amber had been. "Dylan, come on, man." I started to pull him. "We gotta get the fuck out of the water." "It's my fault," he said. "What?" He said, "Saved." Tears welled in his sockets. He said, "Saved, Scott." Riley's hand tightened around mine. She was shaking. She was terrified, but I couldn't leave Dylan. I grabbed his shoulder with my free hand. "Who gives a flying fuck what it said? We have to go." "He's right though. We are saved." My heart sank. I tried to move my hand and met a crushing vice instead of a tender hold. Then Riley's other hand groped my chest. Then another grabbed my hip. Then another on my thigh, until I was swarmed with the spider snares of 10 hands, yanking, clawing, and caressing me down. I craned my neck to look behind me. Riley floated rigid in the front of the pack. 2 corridors of brimstone had swallowed her vision and beamed at me. It hurt to look at. She vibrated, not with fear but pure excitement. "Scott, trust me. You will feel so much better." Her voice was hers, but coated in some saccharine sickness. "Just let go." No, I started. The rest of the group had moved in an instant, surrounding me in a circle of smiling, sunken heads, beaming with joy. "Come on, man," Thomas said. "Lighten up." The hands worked their way up to my face. They yanked, clawed, and pushed. With each attempt, the bliss that had swallowed me had been replaced with a violent rage deeper than I ever thought possible. A thread of electricity ran through each vein, burning my fingertips, gritting my teeth. I felt the violence of 1,000 hatreds, bubbling up from me like I had been set to boil. I want all of them to die bloody deaths. I saw a fantasy of Riley with her dad once more, just to watch him be stabbed to death like the bitch deserved. The image of Dylan battered and bloodied beneath me, holding a baseball bat, and me screaming how much he needed to leave me alone. Get off me, you pieces of shit. I'll kill you. I'll kill all of you. I will drown you till each fucking bubble leaves those pathetic lungs. My eyes rolled around in scalding hot tears. Stop it. Stop it right now. Mom, please. Please help me. Dad. Mom. Anyone. Mom. Mommy. They forced my face up, and instead of the serene sky which had bathed us before, I was faced with the gray-skinned monster, its slimy nose so close that it touched mine, and all that anger melted out of the ice and into watery despair. When my eyes fell beneath the water, as it poised its needles over my eyes, the image of the creature blurred, its bloody grin watered down to a concerned smile. Its jaundiced eyes were blue sapphires now riddled with tears, and the matted fur animal coat had been supplanted by a pristine red cape. You're hurting. Before I could scream beneath the surface, the needles pierced my eyes, and black was all I saw. Then, after an eternity, white. Details filtered in bit by bit as my eyes adjusted. But they were closed. I was crying, rubbing my eyes with fists too small for my face. A small chirp of distant birds rippled into my eardrums, muffled as if underwater. But the wind that pulled on my shirt and shorts was crisp and clear. Mommy, I want my mommy, I said in a voice that was not mine, or at least wasn't currently mine. It was rehearsed audio, played through me as if on a recording. I guess it is a good thing I am right here. I opened my eyes and there she was. Right there. Beautiful, tall, safe, and warm. Clad in her favorite white dress with blue flowers. I snatched her leg without a moment's notice, burying my face into her knees. I thought I'd lost you, she cooed, brushing my hair. Her words were soft with a tinge of buried sadness trailing them. She must have been worried sick. I thought I had lost you, I shouted into her dress. I was so scared, and I take a deep breath, Bug, my mom said, stroking my hair. I did, and I felt so much better. I thought you left me behind on purpose. Why would I do that? You might wake up one day and realize you don't want to be my mom anymore. Oh, honey. She pulled me into the tightest hug I had ever felt, the kind that holds your whole body together and stops you from turning into a puddle of tears. That would never happen. Can I let you in on a little secret? I nodded, rubbing my eyes. When I stopped, she was crouched down at my level, her red hair curled around her in the light breeze, and she smiled something deep and somber. Some days, Mommy wakes up sad. On those days, I don't want to get up. I don't want to be anyone or anything. And even on those days, the only thing I ever want to be is your mama. She Eskimo kissed my nose and ruffled my hair. When she pulled away, our eyes locked on one another, and I was freed, in control of myself once more. I still was me. This version of me from when I was young, but acutely aware of where I was and what had happened. But it's not enough. You will wake up one day, and being my mom won't be enough to make you stay. Her smile faded, and she stared off into the parking lot. The pavement withered into the white like a half-finished watercolor painting, and she and I were the only subjects amidst the frame. Well, maybe, but that isn't because you made me go. It's because I wasn't strong enough to stay. And that's not fair. I stomped my foot. Why should I have to be alone? Why should Dad have to drink all day? Just because you were too much of a coward to. She pulled me in tighter. You were right. It's not fair. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that, Scotty. You didn't deserve to have a mom like me. You didn't deserve to find me like that, she cried into my shoulder. I'm just so sorry. In all the days since I had found my mom's body, and all the condolences and heartfelt comments, through the tears and anger, her words here were the only time I had felt seen, touched. I sobbed into her chest for an eternity. The void of the water muffled my ears, reminding me where I was. I had been on an island of pain since that day. Now I was wading through the surf to find land. This isn't real. You aren't real. I am just drowning, imaging this stupid fucking closure. She clamped my cheeks between her hands and kissed me on the forehead. It's okay. It's all okay. Over her shoulder I saw him. A little boy, no older than 5, with dusky blonde hair, a red cap, who was shedding happy tears. Mom craned her neck to see him. Is it that time already? He nodded. She turned back to me. I have to go, sweetie. You have to go, but you need to know I am so proud of you. I was then, and I am now. I always am. Mommy made a mistake. One, she regretted the moment she did it, but it was never your fault. No one's but mine, you hear. I know that will not fix it. It won't undo anything, but you need to hear it. You need to hear it so you can stop drowning yourself and finally come up for air. I looked into her eyes. A million thoughts and aches came to mind. I want to show how much I loved her and hated her for what she did. It flooded in and through me. Each thought made me lighter, lifting me higher. She grinned as I ascended, holding my cheeks as my legs lifted towards the surface of the dream. I waded through each painful remembrance with the deliberation of years. The moments of suffering lapped upon me like tides of the surf and pulled away just as quickly. Isaac clapped soundlessly as I underwent this process. I love you, Scotty. Then, all those thoughts, all those aches, all that anger, all that sadness muddled into 5 little words. I love you too, Mom. Scott. Dylan shouted into my face. Suddenly, I was on the lake's edge, looking at my crying friend and the sprinkling of stars overhead. I glanced about. It wasn't just me. We were all back on land, bone dry, eyes on the sky above. Riley started to sob. Dean looked out at the lake, bewildered, ruffling his short hair. Rick and Thomas looked at one another as if ascertaining whether they had dreamed this or not. What? I groaned. My body ached with the exhaustion of a completed marathon. I wasn't sore, just spent. Did you guys see that thing? Dylan screamed. It took you all, beneath the water, and you were so happy about it. You were down there for so long, like 20 minutes. You should all be dead. Riley ignored Dylan and ran over to me, crashing at my side and squeezing my shoulders. Did you see her, Scott? Did you? Before I could answer, she hugged me. I talked to my dad. We played Monopoly and talked. It was a Sunday right before he died. He told me he saw how sad I had been. And, please tell me you saw your mom. Please tell me I am not fucking crazy. Dylan looked at me with abject horror on his face. I looked over to Thomas and Dean. The moment our eyes met, they looked away in seeming embarrassment. Eventually, they returned my gaze with a soft nod. I never found out totally what they saw, but they both stood a little straighter than when we entered the water, more resolute in themselves. I saw my dad, Rick said, hugging his knees by the water's edge. He was watching TV like he was when I left, but I got to hear the things he wants to say, but is too proud to. I got to go home. He peeled off the sand and bolted to his car. Amber looked at Dylan, smiling ear to ear. She's okay, Dylan. My sister's okay. She kissed him and wrapped her arms around his neck. The horror on Dylan's face melted into confusion. He had seen a monster killing our friends. He must have been so lost and afraid, never getting the relief we had. But Amber's embrace had begun to push him past the first barrier of doubt. He patted her on the back, looked at me, waiting for my answer, as if permission to believe any of what had happened did. My mom told me she was sorry and that she loved me. The silence fell over us, a warm one of comfort that eased the hallucination into something more. Then we all looked to the lake and Isaac's grave. The wind picked up his cape and we heard in a clear, crystalline voice of a little boy, saved. There were so many more things we could have said, but much like how the water had held us in this strange warmth, the aftermath of our baptisms had a similar hold. We all but Dylan shared the same look at first, a deep confusion we exchanged for relief bit by bit. The need to wonder lessened. I don't believe much in God, but if those who witnessed Jesus' miracles are to be believed, then I understand them now. Some things are too beautiful to ask more information about. Sometimes you have to let a miracle be a miracle. The fears, the horror, the insecurity had all been swallowed by the water. We were cleansed, but not completely. In a way, we were still damp, but on our way to being dry and no longer held beneath the water. And as we made our way back to our cars, we joked, laughed, talked about things like we hadn't experienced anything crazy at the lake at all. In some way, the experience faded. We remember, I certainly still do, but not in the way you remember an event, more like how you see an era of your life. A collage of experiences you wandered through and internalized. It was this precious, glass-sealed gift we had been given. None of us had any interest in shattering that seal. But the gifts didn't stop at the lake. When I got home, ready to pick up my father off the floor, I found him upright on the couch instead, still draped in the blanket I had given him. The plate on the table before him was cleaned, and he had a soberish smile on his face as he stared at Mom's photo. I took a seat next to him. I had this wonderful dream about her. It was so real. He turned to me, and I swore he saw the scab on my heart that started to form. He hugged me suddenly, but it wasn't for my sake. He did it like someone lost adrift in a blizzard, desperate to find heat for survival. It was as if he could sense the dryness inching away at the damp and pulled himself to leech a bit for himself. And I knew, then and there, that he deserved it too. I lost my mom. He lost that and more. I don't know if what happened was real. Maybe we were crazy or drunk or lost. I know I didn't drink that night, but is it more plausible to believe I couldn't have than what I remember? My life hasn't been perfect since I went to Pickerel Park, but the pain I felt up to my plunge doesn't ache like it used to. The scar is still there, but it has healed. It's firm now, strong, faded to a benign mark. And yes, I do muse some nostalgia over the broken windows in my glass house. Whether or not it was real doesn't matter, because my life turned around that night and the morning after. I don't know what compelled me to ask him, but I am glad I did. Dad? Yes, Scotty? His breath smelled of whiskey, but the word Scotty didn't sting. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed it. There's this pool in Pickerel Park. Will you go with me?